the northern border of the Deccan Empire, the province of Hershey. They were constantly under attack from the evil kingdom of Icarus, popularly known as the descendants of the Black Wolves. This empire is blocked from the west by a dense forest filled with monsters and wild animals. In the entire Deccan Empire, which has conquered the eastern continent, there is no place more dangerous than Hershey. This is the province ruled by the Versace family. They are called the Guardians of Deccan. They have raised generations of great swordsmen, but soon all this will be forgotten. The crown prince will be poisoned, and the Versace family will have a hand in it. That's exactly what Olivia Versace will do. Her large frame inspired her to portray a future villain. And this villainess is now admiring herself in the mirror. What kind of Olivia are we even talking about? A girl named Hanbi woke up one day to find herself in her favorite novel. Usually, when this happens, the time traveler takes the place of one of the main characters. But for some reason, she got the villain instead. And not just a villain, but also so fat with that nose and lips pressed together like hamster cheeks. You can't tell her apart from a bun. This drooping double chin is even more terrifying. This dull hair, she looks like some kind of wild boar. She was once really cool, graduated from the police academy, and became a detective. Thanks to her training, she was able to create the body of her dreams, which all the men who surrounded her craved. Until yesterday, she was 30-year-old Hanbi, so she has no idea why the hell she ended up in a teenager's body. And also the one who is supposed to be executed for murder. She was very angry. She was not at all happy with this development of events. Then the maids knocked on her door and announced that they had brought breakfast for Mrs. Olivia. There were still 2 whole years left before the character's death, so she had plenty of time, but she had absolutely no motivation. She just ate, slept, and had fun. Why should she do anything? She would be executed in 2 years anyway. 3 months passed, and the girl overate again. So much so that she couldn't even move, and it was also difficult for her to finish the joke. She didn't understand at all what to do if she knew that in 2 years, she too would be executed. She finally realized that overeating was not the best option in this situation. She needed to get a grip on herself. It will be difficult for her, but she needs to take care of herself. If she wants to become better, she needs to start playing sports. Perhaps she should start taking fencing lessons. It's really hard. She's all covered in fat. She needs to lose it first and then build up her muscles. Daisy Meridian is the head maid of the Versace family. Suddenly, one of the maids called Daisy and said that she needed to come with her quickly. She shouted to the maid that Olivia had started running. Having lost weight, Olivia's face has become much more beautiful. If she's a villain, she's a charming one, and all this is thanks to her strict diet. After all, she has to maintain her image. After business on the border, her father and brother return to the estate. Count Gerald Versace is a brave but a little stupid father of Olivia. Dad rushed into her arms and shouted with a smile, "Because she looks just like your mother." Olivia's brother Kyle Versace says she's like her daughter. And of course, Olivia has something of her mother in her. I felt somehow offended, because he was so happy just because she finally lost weight. Now that she's gotten herself into shape, her father thinks she should start taking care of the family business. He wants her to take over Hershey and get things in order there. Olivia was absolutely delighted, and her brother remarked that he also hoped that she could do it. He and his father will have to go to the border again to deal with the monsters in the forest. Her father asked with a trembling voice if Olivia could really handle this. The girl said that of course she would succeed. She was confident in herself. At least she will try to do so. Suddenly, someone called Mrs. Olivia, and she turned around to see a man and a woman. They told her that frosts had arrived. All the crops had died. Practically nothing was growing for them. They hadn't even managed to save the potatoes. Everything had frozen. If they don't do something, then in the winter, all the inhabitants of Hershey will die of hunger. Olivia doesn't even know what they should do to survive, and it will be hard to call it life. The man said that if it weren't for these taxes, they would still be able to hold out. The lady noted that these people are very kind and polite. But then Olivia herself thought about what she was thinking about. Now she should worry about herself. She herself would soon die. She spent the entire year getting things going in Hershey. It was difficult to do things alone, so she found a loyal assistant. She approached him again and asked him to write a report regarding tax cuts in the province of Hershey. The cold had hit hard there. Olivia had no idea what she was wasting her time on. She was going to die soon, so another year had passed. While the lady was busy, a maid came running to her and informed her that the imperial delegation would soon arrive. The girl was in shock. The maid quickly informed her that her father wanted to see her right now. But first, she had to take a bath. It all happened so quickly that Olivia didn't even have time to think. The maid was already choosing a suitable outfit for her. After that, she chose two options and began asking the lady which one she liked better. When the mistress made her choice, the maid Daisy remarked that it was an excellent choice, and the lord really knew how to present himself in the best light. This maid really got on the mistress's nerves with her pretense. For some reason, she is always so happy. Afterwards, they packed up and went to the girl's father. The events of the novella begin when Olivia turns 17. She must be sent to the imperial palace to become the crown prince's favorite. And they'll also send her to study at the academy. That's all true. True, she is not yet familiar with any principles, and nothing has been discussed about the academy. It seems that by her actions, she was able to avoid all of this. Olivia thought that if she didn't act like in the novel, the plot would go differently. Well, now the imperial delegation is coming to Hershey. The girl greeted her father with a smile and noted that she was told that he had called her. Now Olivia needs to find out why the hell they are here. Brother asked why it was taking so long, and father asked that it go faster. Olivia noted that she had urgent matters to attend to, so she apologized for being late. She also asked what it was. She didn't want to hear that he was saying that it was somehow connected with the prince and the academy. The girl relied on it because it was for her and asked if she could read it. The father approached her and said that this letter was from the emperor himself. The girl was in complete horror, and the boy shouted that her father could not send her there. Olivia asked to let her guess whether she had really been summoned to the imperial court. Father was very proud of her. She was their everything, their real pride. Her brother remarked that his little sister was quite smart, but Olivia thought they were just dumbasses. Both father and brother are like children. They are very easily impressed. The family that brings back the most valuable interface monsters that spring on their lands will have the chance to send one of their daughters as a candidate for the crown prince's favorite. This is just some stupid and senseless request period. The father noted that the crown prince is very cunning. He added back that he was very cunning, so she shouldn't go to him. Actually, there is another reason it is still a typical story where the main character and the main character fall in love with each other. Everything has already been decided who, if not Olivia, should know about it. It's very saccharine. Olivia turned to Haman and asked me if he thought his father and brother were already worrying too much. The man admitted that he agreed with the lady. The girl was grateful to him, and looking out the window, noticed that the weather was very good. It was very beautiful outside the window. She looked out the window while they were arguing among themselves. She didn't try to get herself in order, but she is far from being that beautiful. Olivia decided to write a letter to the prince on her own behalf. It was with him that the plot of the novella began, but the content of the letter is now completely different. Olivia is very embellished in it. Every word is filled with such arrogance. Olive is absolutely sick of what is written. This letter is terrible. After this, the prince is unlikely to summon her to the palace. This was all her father and brother's idea. It's unclear how such idiots could come up with such a thing. The brother said that if someone offended her, then this year she would challenge him to a duel and cut him down. The father said that if his son couldn't cope, then he would cut him down. They are just idiots. They don't understand politics or economics. They just want to kill and cut to pieces. It's no wonder Olivia became a villain. With some upbringing, this is basically normal. But it's okay, the girl will fix everything and find a better family, with a kind and faithful husband. To hell with old Olivia, she won't become a villain. And let the imperial family go to hell too. Both father and son were shocked by this. The girl said that they should give the imperial family the trophy that they asked for, and that they would no longer raise taxes. If she became his favorite, then they would be provided for anyway. The father noted that this sounded logical in principle, but in order to refuse them, they will say that the girl has been very ill in recent years. And it didn't matter if it seemed strange. My brother, of course, didn't mind, and said everything would be as my sister said. But the father was not sure that he would not believe that she was sick. The girl was sure that they would believe it when they saw her portraits. A couple of years ago, she looked absolutely hideous. She's not blind after all. Her father understood, so he asked Haman to call the others. Then, Chief Secretary Edwin joined them. Olivia recognized him immediately. He was teaching her how to work with papers. but she didn't quite understand who it was behind him. But when she looked closer, she realized that this was Daisy's older brother and Kyle's best friend. This is Daniel Meridian. He has model looks and built-in legs, a face that makes the heart fill with warmth. He became her first love and taught her how to handle a sword. Kyle asked why he was there, and Daniel reported that the Count had called him names. He also greeted the girl, and she understood that this meant that he remembered her. He was a true gentleman, and that made her feel a little embarrassed. The Meridian family, and when there are friends in it and they raised such a wonderful man. He makes you want to retire somewhere on the edge of the world, start a family and build a house. He is not a man, he is just a dream. Kyle asked where he was going. He should ask him for permission too. Olivia was very angry and did not understand how he dared to stop Daniel. The secretary turned to the gentleman and asked if they could find somewhere private. The gentleman suggested that they go to the conference room, and the secretary said that it concerned payment for his services. The Count asked what was wrong with her. Meanwhile, Olivia had already run up to Daniel and started asking him how he was doing. Kyle found it necessary to ask what she was thinking and ordered her to let go of his hand immediately. Oh, Daniel has such muscles that Olivia just floats, and that dumbass Kyle is too arrogant to admit his beauty. Kyle included that he was her older brother, so she should obey him. But in general, he can scream at the top of his lungs. She doesn't care because she's next to Daniel. She asked if he was hungry, and he responded by asking about her. He has such a pleasant voice. If Olivia were to give him a rating, it would be top marks. Her older brother began to think they were flirting. Father informed Livia that they could not simply refuse the invitation of the imperial family. The emperor has considered their family his ally for many years. That's why her father asked her to come up with something and her brother would take it, that they completely trust her. But she can't just leave and abandon everything. I'll leave her in the estate. Her father will appoint her brother to manage everything. And he's also an idiot here. This could have a bad effect on her future position, and that's why the girl said that she had already decided everything. Despite the loud and flattering words of the emperors in the letter, he didn't mention a word about how carefully they guarded their borders and destroyed the forests from monsters all those winters. This cannot continue any longer. They need to publicly declare their intention to amass troops at the borders. Father pointed out that they couldn't just abandon the land and head for the border. Kyle was also certain the nobility would object to such a decision. He really does believe that this relationship must be realized. It cannot be spoiled in the north, although it is quite safe there now. Olivia pointed out that they were their comrades, so they should be offered to go to the border together. She suggested writing to the emperor, stating that the Versace family's main task was to protect the borders, and that he should remember their past achievements. They must show their best side. But the Count remarked that he didn't know that he was resisting the emperor's will. That was strange. But if they leave it like this, then they will take Olivia in the yard. She will be like a prisoner. My father was simply horrified by this and said that this could not be allowed to happen. Her father promised he wouldn't allow it. The mere mention of the word captive sent her father into a frenzy. But remembering the story, the way she was treated in the palace really did feel like captivity. Even if the emperor expressed his will, it does not mean that they must follow it. They need to think about it carefully. Versace Estate, Olivia's study. The head of the trade union noticed that the lady was a bit late. Oscar noted that she takes on a lot of trouble. Secretary Sam approached the lady and asked if she needed anything. She suggested starting with his report, and then she would leave with Oscar. Oscar was surprised and asked again if she had any business of her own with the trade union. He asked where she was going anyway. Then the lady was very happy because she saw that Daniel had also come to hers, and her muse came to her, so she was very happy and said that they needed to see how things were going with the recently built soap factory. She asked if he would go with her, and the gentleman said they could have something to eat before leaving, so he asked if she was worried about the negotiations with the imperial delegation. Olivia said that she was confident that her brother would sort everything out. He was a master negotiator. After all, he had spent 2 whole years studying this. After that, Daniel offered her a candy, and she was quite surprised. She told Daniel that she was no longer a little girl and that a lady was supposed to receive flowers. Candy was actually quite nice. Daniel asked for forgiveness, but the girl said that she would still eat it. She didn't want to upset him. Daniel said with a smile that next time he would bring her both candy and flowers. The girl simply couldn't look at him because he was so handsome that he was practically shining. Daniel has forever captured Olivia's heart trading department. 2 years ago, Olivia turned to the merchant union for help organizing food supplies in Hershey. This required the construction of several retail outlets. Things were going really badly here before. But soon, when Olivia took charge of everything and formed the necessary environment for the emperor, everything more or less improved. They're unloading something again. Now it's the largest retail outlet in the area. Previously, only a couple of people worked here. The lady turned to Oscar and said that he needed to get to work already. He had to go to the main office already. But someone else already does his work. That's why the lady said he has a really shitty attitude toward work. Oscar also remarked that Daisy liked hearing the mistress swear. Olivia pointed out that he could complain about her only after that she would overwhelm all their branches with supplies, and he certainly wasn't monitoring from work. That's why Oscar said he would keep quiet. He already had too little free time. The lady turned to the secretary and asked if they needed anything. Oscar was shocked because he was being ignored again. The secretary reported that workers were complaining about large accumulations of carts on the roads. Olivia said that before building roads, it would be better if they divided the city into commercial and residential areas. It would have to cost money, but that's how it is. The roads need to be built before they get clogged with water and sewer pipes. She doesn't want workers damaging them while they're digging up the ground. Sam said that everything would be as it said, but suddenly the lady snatched the folder from his hands. The lady said that they should start working on the roads immediately after the sewer and water supply systems. There is no time to waste. Now she will write everything out in more detail, and in a few minutes she has already provided a plan and asked him to distribute the budget in such a way that you will have all the details. The secretary was completely shocked that she wrote everything down so quickly and in such detail. While working as a detective, she was often dumped with paperwork, so for her this is a trifle. Even though there are no computers in this world, she copes with everything perfectly well on her own. Olivia said that it was time for them to get to work. You can't drink river water, it's too dirty. You need to build a special storage facility from which the water supply will come. The sewage could leak into the river, and they can't risk that because they don't want a pandemic to break out there. There won't be any such problems with the storage, so he himself thinks it's a great idea. Olivia asked Oscar to tell her what he thought, whether it would be cheaper if they bought the building materials in advance, or vice versa. But he soon noticed that it was better to do it right away, so she asked him to send Oscar the transcript himself when he finished. Now it's time for them to go to Debon. They need to see how things are going. Their Debon is a former soap factory located near the slaughterhouse. Because of such a proximity, it had to be closed. Now it is used as a storage facility for animal oils. It was decided to build a new soap factory for the army in one of the poor areas. This was supposed to provide jobs for Daisy the head maid, who was appointed responsible for Debon. The idea for a new soap factory came from Miss Evans, who was a laundry worker. She thought that a lot of soap could be made from animal fat, which would be very helpful in their household. Olivia tagged her because it was a great idea and asked if she knew what it took to make soap. This required ash processed manure and sea salt, and with the help of Miss Evans, soap production began. Now she too works at Debon. Olivia asked how people were enjoying the products and what they were making at the new factory. She said that she wasn't very impressed with this knowledge and that it was unlikely that they would be able to sell soap to them. But the lady did not understand why this was so. She was even a little outraged. The girl's acquaintance with Oscar is still a story. He always treated her like an adult. They met 2 years ago when she was 15 years old. The Maroon Shipping Department. The gentleman introduced himself as Oscar Radar. He also apologized for his appearance. The lady believed that his boss beat him. The guy said that he had been working there for a long time, but they still kept delaying his payment. He had to do a bit of digging around in the books. He didn't even bother to mention that he'd simply had to steal a few things. But he was caught. And if it weren't for the lady, the boss would have definitely killed him. It seems like she saved his life. She doesn't remember him being in the novel. Therefore, the lady hoped that the plot of his rescue would not be greatly affected. He is incredibly lucky the lady wants to offer him a job for her. And that same day, she took Oscar with her. And the next day, she appointed him head of Maroonu. Oscar was right. We just need soap, people. You know, the smell of it just makes you turn up your nose. Previously, when she bought it in bulk at the supermarket, she didn't even think about how difficult it was to cook. It's very difficult without the internet. You can't find normal ingredients anywhere. The secretary turned to the lady and said that Mrs. Daisy and Mr. Daniel had come to see her. The lady was very happy to see Daniel, and I informed her that the carriage wouldn't make it to Sasna. We'd have to ride on horseback. Therefore, they asked the lady to change her clothes before leaving. Sasna is a city that lost many soldiers who went to guard the borders. There was no talk of compensation for the loss of a wet nurse. All that was left for the widows' families was to sell the herbs growing in the Toser Mountains. Daisy introduced the lady to the guy she told them to get acquainted. "This is Gerald. He's in charge of construction." Olivia noted that he'd done a great job. Daniel noted that the break had just happened, so he asked why the workers were still running. "Here they distribute food to all those in need, the elderly, children, and the sick." The lady asked for attention and said that he did not mention this in the report. Daisy thought this was unacceptable. The guy started saying he just thought it would be better this way. The lady said that he spends their money and doesn't even tell them where. He must put aside personal interests and not hide what the budget is spent on. Gerald said that he didn't think about it to me, so he asks for forgiveness. It will not happen again. But Daisy also noted that he acted nobly. He just shouldn't have hidden it, but told her right away. He does the right thing by taking care of those in need. The gentleman was very grateful for her words. He said that she was not angry. Olivia really admired Daisy. She was a great girl, so the lady was proud of her. "I'm not done here, but there's still something else to do." Oscar asked what the lady was talking about, and she meant that a hospital would need to be built here. But the residents most likely would not be able to pay for the treatment. They are relatives of fallen soldiers who defended their land. "The hospital will be free." Oscar said the idea was great, but the execution wasn't so great. She knew she'd have to spend money, and he was always pestering her with his comments, not even letting her think about it. I noted that it is necessary to find an inexpensive doctor. Any doctor will be beneficial for these people, even without expensive drugs. There is no serious illness circulating in the city, but the health of citizens is far from normal. Everyone is walking around looking so gloomy. The girl had a hard day, and Oscar is even annoying her here, saying that gloominess is not a reason to build a hospital. The lady was very tired, so she decided to lie down. It was very warm there, not as warm as when Daniel was next to her. She remembered asking him why he was refusing her, and wanted to know the reason. Then, Olivia asked him why he didn't want to become her boyfriend. Daniel said that he couldn't, but the lady was furious and didn't understand why. Daniel lowered his eyes and noted that bad rumors could spread among the nobility. Besides, soldiers are needed at the border, and that is why the lady burst into tears. She asked him to just know that he was tired of her following him around all day long. He approached her and said that she was already 17 and would soon be married off, and he couldn't interfere with that. But then the lady said that she would only marry someone more valuable, or does he really dislike her that much? The gentleman said that it was the other way around, so the lady calmed down a little. She asked again if this meant that he would become her gentleman, and he confirmed it. The gentleman asked if he was serious, and so Daniel gave her a word on his fingers. She asked him just not to leave and to always be with her, so Daniel promised her all this. After this, the lady woke up and saw Daniel in front of her. She immediately began to ask where he had disappeared to. Daniel noted that he met Kyle on the way, and he offered to have a friendly duel with him. Olivia asked who won, and Daniel said that of course he did. The lady asked me to remind him because he was only 17. Daniel noted that this was indeed the case. His birthday was coming soon. Olivia asked when he had grown so much. Daniel himself didn't know. Olivia was in very poor physical shape, and it took a lot of work to fix it. And when everything was starting to get better, she finally met the master. Finally, he has appeared. His name is Giorgio Esther. Giorgio received news of Olivia's illness and felt relieved to learn she had recovered. This brought him joy, as his worry for her had disappeared. Giorgio was a close friend and relative of Prince Leonardo, playing a minor role in the story. Despite this, his actions proved quite significant. Giorgio was kind and caring, standing by Olivia's side until the very end. His support was crucial to her, even though his role seemed small. However, despite his outward behavior in Olivia's eyes, Giorgio became the one who would destroy the Versace family, and it was his actions that would lead to her death. He will be the one to carry out the sentence and execute Olivia despite all his displays of kindness and support, which will be a terrible omen for her. Giorgio was extremely surprised to learn that Olivia was skilled in fencing. This discovery made him regard her with new respect and wonder. Olivia was slightly indignant at his surprise, believing that her obvious fencing skills should have been obvious to anyone who knew her even slightly. He noticed her silence and felt uneasy, thinking he might have upset her with his visit. His comment about her silence only heightened the tension. Realizing he finally understood what had happened, Giorgio began to apologize. He thought maybe he should leave so as not to disturb Olivia. He simply wanted to know how she was feeling, concerned about her health. However, his concern could also be perceived as intrusion. Giorgio wondered if he'd met his killer. Perhaps he'd have acted the same way. He felt uneasy, unsure how to handle the situation. Olivia, sensing his inappropriate behavior, said that since he had shown himself to be ignorant, she asked him to leave and not waste her time. She had just finished training and didn't want to waste her energy talking to him, deciding that it was important for her to focus on other things. Olivia realized that her family, the Versaces, was highly respected among the northern nobility. If anyone threatened her authority, she was prepared to defend herself. Despite all her efforts to appear virtuous, her villainous nature began to emerge, and she decided to act decisively to maintain her status. Olivia threw down the gauntlet, declaring that she would show him no mercy, and was prepared to strike a blow herself. Not just turn the other cheek, it was a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Giorgio picked up the glove and noticed that she had dropped it. This surprised him, and he realized there was more to her actions than just that. Olivia explained that she did not drop the glove by accident, but did it on purpose to demonstrate her determination and strength in that moment. Giorgio thought she was challenging him to a duel, but Olivia only asked what he was going to do next, leaving room for his reaction. The man was confused and didn't understand what she meant. However, Olivia stated that he was standing in her way, implying that he needed to take action. Giorgio apologized for blocking her path, and his assistant, frightened by her determination, admitted that he was afraid of her, considering her a terrible woman. Giorgio stepped back and said that he would now follow Olivia, giving her the opportunity to go first, so as not to hinder her progress. Olivia was stunned by Giorgio's changed demeanor. Seeing his face darken, she felt he had become more dangerous, like a villain. After she passed, the guy wished her luck, hoping that everything would work out, and they would both be able to move forward with their respective endeavors. A few days later, Olivia knocked on her father's door to tell him the important news. The delegation had finally arrived, as she had expected. When Olivia walked in, her eyes instantly caught sight of a familiar pair of silver hair, which left her in shock. This was someone she hadn't expected to see. Giorgio, who greeted his mistress, was genuinely pleased. He introduced himself again and explained that he would now represent His Majesty and was ready for an important meeting. Olivia also introduced herself, stating that she was very pleased to meet him and that she was glad to meet such a person despite their previous meetings. Although they had already met before, she understood that in front of her father, she would have to play the role of a first acquaintance, as if they had not met before. The gentleman suggested the Count discuss this important topic with the entire family, as it affected everyone's interests. He suggested they discuss it all together at the same table. Olivia, agreeing, admitted that it was a wonderful idea, and so her father suggested that she sit down so that everyone could calmly discuss the pressing issues. The lady addressed Giorgio, explaining that their family had already responded to His Majesty's request in writing. This response was important, and they were open to further discussion. The answer certainly satisfied him, but still, in connection with some new circumstances, this issue was worth raising again to discuss all the details. Giorgio expressed confidence that since she had already recovered, it was time to return to the question of her moving to the imperial palace, which would be an important step for the family. In Olivia's eyes, he appeared to be a devious man who sought to weaken the Versace family by leaving it without a key member, which caused her displeasure. She explained that although she still felt a little ill, she had fought quite well with a sword a couple of days ago, and this certainly did not justify her condition. Olivia, a little irritated, replied that her illness still persisted, but Giorgio clearly did not want to listen to her words and continued to insist on his own. Giorgio tried to understand her, saying that the proposal she'd been offered was a dream come true for any woman. He couldn't understand why she was refusing. Olivia firmly replied that she had her own reasons for refusing. She was attracted to other men and did not agree to the proposed option. The Count remarked that his daughter had a very unusual taste, and added that this was not worth worrying about, since in general her preferences were always unique. He assured her there was no need to worry about it. The Crown Prince was renowned for his beauty, but he wasn't right for him. Giorgio was certain she would fall in love with him at first sight. Giorgio continued to say that the prince was even more handsome in person, and his fencing skills surpassed many. He was sure she would sense this immediately. Olivia, already irritated, thought that Giorgio, if he was so confident in the prince, should marry him himself. The girl continued to insist that this prince did not suit her taste, but the gentleman insisted that she would definitely regret her decision. Olivia began to express that if she went to the palace, her regret would be even greater. So her father intervened and said there was nothing more to discuss with the Marquise. The Versace family has served the kingdom with loyalty and courage for many years, earning trust and respect, for which they have been granted important privileges. The father asked for respect for such a family. Giorgio began to say that the lady could see that she had gained weight, adding that her age did not correspond with what was stated in the letter. Olivia replied that her appearance should not be misleading. She was still sick despite the improvement in her condition. If the courtiers learned that she had rejected the crown prince only because of his appearance, everyone would consider it a mistake, since he had failed to present himself properly. Giorgio noted that she was quite cunning, and Olivia added that when a person is ill, his senses become more acute and sensitive. As soon as the conversation came to an end, Olivia decided to leave their company, believing that there was nothing more to discuss. But the gentleman asked her to wait a little longer, and Olivia stopped wondering what he wanted from her next. Giorgio asked if she would see him off, awaiting her answer, with some excitement, hoping for her participation. Olivia replied that she was unlikely to see him off as she felt ill and needed rest and peace. A month had passed since Giorgio Estaire's visit. The weather was magnificent, with bright sunshine and gentle breezes, creating an atmosphere reminiscent of autumnal comfort. Daisy approached the lady, reminding her that it was already time for lunch, but the lady was still sitting lost in thought, not noticing how time had flown by. Daisy also reported that a letter had arrived for her without specifying who it was from, and noticing this with mild interest. The lady could not understand who could have sent her the letter, and when she took it in her hands in surprise, a slight look of bewilderment appeared on her face. The letter was from Giorgio, who informed her that the cold autumn winds had arrived and winter was coming, warning her of the coming cold snap. He asked her to dress warmly and not go outside until she was fully recovered, worrying about her health and hoping for her visit to the palace. He was worried about her condition, and despite the distance, asked her to take measures to avoid catching a cold, completely assuring her that he was writing with love. Daisy, in her delight, asked if this was the same letter from the Marquis they had had before, adding that he was very caring. She noticed that there were many illnesses in the autumn, and believed that the lady would certainly fall ill again, hoping for a quick answer to Giorgio's letter. Olivia was sure Giorgio was just trying to anger her. Daisy in turn wondered if he had truly fallen in love with his mistress. Olivia was shocked by this assumption, believing that Daisy was mistaken, and declared that he was just an idiot who did not deserve her attention. Giorgio played a decisive role in developing the relationship between the novella's main characters. Daisy thought the lady was about to respond to him. Olivia didn't really want to answer, but she knew she'd probably have to, since Giorgio wouldn't leave her alone anyway. So she wrote to him that because of his actions, she caught a cold and fell ill again, finding only him to blame for this. She added to the letter a request not to write to her anymore, as she could not tolerate such messages and was already tired of them. She also included in the letter that she hates receiving letters and hopes that this will be the last time such a thing happens. Giorgio continued to write her letters full of sarcasm and irony, despite her refusal and cold attitude not giving up in his efforts. Sometimes she did answer him, but only out of pity, sending short and neutral replies to stop his persistent attempts. Soon the maids began spreading rumors, and even fan fiction began to be written about their relationship. Surprised by the intensity of their correspondence, Giorgio bumped into Olivia in the hallway, and he immediately realized that he had fallen in love with her at first sight, despite all the obstacles that separated them. He even tried to ask the Count for her hand, but he refused, not ready to allow him to be with Olivia despite his feelings. Although they were separated by entire provinces, Giorgio continued to write her letters, in which he expressed his love and desire to be with her. He wrote that he reread all her past letters, even when she did not answer him, feeling that his heart belonged only to her. Giorgio also wrote that he began to take up fencing seriously, because a real man should be able to handle a sword, hoping that this would impress her. Since there was still no response from her, he thought that she was still ill or had too much to do to answer his letters. Olivia was sure that it was time to get rid of all this correspondence and free herself from it, considering the letters useless trash. Her brother asked her what she would do with the letters, perhaps burning them. Olivia was indifferent and said she now understood why Giorgio didn't have a date. Kyle remarked that her lack of suitors was due to the same reason as his. However, the lady assured him she had admirers. Moreover, there was more than one. The gentleman simply wasn't aware of their existence. Kyle, finding this strange, hastened to find out the truth from his sister, but she only shrugged her shoulders and assured him that she was no less surprised by the lady's words. After a brief conversation, the lady decisively dismissed her brother, noting that he'd better mind his own business. She added that they needed to talk to Daisy. The lady said she had already discussed everything with Daisy and revealed all the details. Now she couldn't care less about his feelings or behaviors. However, the maid sincerely did not understand why the mistress hid the letters that came from this man for so long. Olivia sighed and declared that they had completely misread the situation and that nothing serious had ever happened between her and this man. Nevertheless, Daisy was certain that he was truly in love. The maid's words only angered Olivia. She quickly retorted, saying that this man's feelings were complete nonsense. Even if he was in love, it meant nothing, since she was indifferent to him. Daisy, after listening to her, carefully asked Olivia whether the man's confessions had hurt her and whether they had caused her discomfort. Olivia couldn't help but admit that the man's words had cut her deeply. Moreover, she was furious at his confession and everything that came with it. Olivia added that she cared deeply for Daniel. It was her unexpected revelation that left the maid stumped. The lady's words confused Daisy. She thought Daniel was rude and irresponsible, but Olivia only chuckled and remarked that, as the saying goes, the heart cannot be controlled. The maid's reaction was entirely expected, since Daniel was her brother. Nevertheless, the mistress decided to bring the conversation back on track and discuss important matters. She recalled that Daisy had mentioned suitors and expressed curiosity about which of them held a special place in her heart. Daisy, embarrassed by the direct question, cautiously admitted that she did like someone, but she preferred not to name that person. However, Olivia immediately guessed that this sympathy was unrequited love, which she expressed. Meanwhile, at the Smack Hall Academy, the manager and Crown Prince Leonardo was trying to calm down his cousin Giorgio, who was laughing loudly, interfering with his reading. Leonardo asked Giorgio irritably why he was making so much noise when he could be doing something more useful instead of distracting everyone. He complained that he was trying to concentrate on a book while Giorgio was doing something incomprehensible and disturbing the peace. Leonardo noticed a strange woman's glove on his cousin and asked where he got it from and who it belonged to. Giorgio smiled and admitted that the glove belonged to the lady who had managed to win his heart. Leonardo noted skeptically that Giorgio had changed since returning from Hershey. He suggested calling a doctor to figure out what was wrong. Giorgio, laughing, replied that there was no need to worry, since this woman wasn't his type anyway. Leonardo advised him to leave him alone and find another victim for his stories. Olivia decided to have a frank conversation and asked how he would react if someone confessed their feelings to him. Daniel replied that his reaction would depend entirely on who exactly made such a confession. Olivia clarified that if the feelings were not mutual, what would he do then? Daniel admitted that he would feel awkward, and Olivia agreed, adding that it was a very difficult situation. She joked that Daniel had probably broken more than one woman's heart with his indifference. Daniel admitted that it's even harder for those who have confessed their feelings and are not reciprocated. The pain of unrequited love is intense. Olivia thoughtfully noted that if you love someone who doesn't care, it might be better not to even confess your feelings to them. After these words, she herself wondered why she had started this conversation at all and what it could lead to. Daniel agreed that sometimes it was better to keep your feelings to yourself to avoid unnecessary suffering on both sides. He added that in his place, that's exactly what he would have done. In the novella, it turns out Daniel never quite had the courage to confess his love to Olivia. Despite their closeness, he continued to call her mistress, remembering her count's title. All of this made Olivia incredibly sad. She thought about how hard it was to keep her feelings under control. However, she decided not to delay any longer. Putting her doubts aside, she decided to take action, no matter how difficult it might be. Olivia remembered that once as a child, she confessed her feelings to Daniel. This confession, in her opinion, must have made him feel awkward and embarrassed. Daniel noticed that this was something completely different, and despite his surprise, he tried not to focus on it. Olivia asked him again if he really thought it was a completely different case to understand his feelings. It seemed to her that he considered himself unworthy of her, that it was incredibly difficult for him. All these thoughts led Olivia to the sad realization that she might be facing rejection again. Kyle noticed that Daisy was claiming to have found a boyfriend and asked Daniel if he thought it was true. Daniel wasn't surprised and noted that guys were chasing Daisy in droves, so it was quite possible. Kyle was taken aback and asked if he was serious about it, but Daniel didn't have time for Daisy at the moment. He was much more worried about Olivia because she hadn't changed since their last conversation, and this worried him greatly. He began to think that perhaps Olivia was hinting to him that her feelings for him had finally faded and would never return. The thought crossed his mind that perhaps Olivia had fallen in love with the Marquise, and this became another cause for concern for him. Meanwhile, at the Meridian family estate, Daisy was carefully monitoring the condition of the flowers in the garden, taking care of them as usual. She noticed that her brother arrived earlier than expected, and remarked that he arrived too early, which surprised her. Daisy advised him to change his clothes as quickly as possible because dinner would soon be ready, and she was going to set the table. Daniel a little nervously said that he had a question for Daisy, to which she asked, surprised, what exactly he wanted to talk about. He asked her if she knew whether the Marquis continued to send Olivia his letters, as he was interested in this. Daisy confirmed that the Marquis still sends letters to Olivia, noting that he is quite caring and attentive. Daniel disagreed with her opinion, finding the Marquis annoying and arrogant. Despite his slight build, he wasn't her type. Daisy noted with a smile that he spoke exactly like Kyle, adding that there was nothing tactful in the Marquis' letters. However, she countered that the Marquis was very talented at writing, revealing his feelings and heart to Olivia. Daniel, however, couldn't understand what was so special about that. The maid reported that Olivia sometimes answered letters, and it seemed that the Marquis was not indifferent to her. Hearing this, Daniel was very upset, and his mood suddenly worsened. He felt that this was not a good sign. Daisy also said she only showed one of her projects because she was too shy to share the others. Her shyness prevented her from revealing everything she had done. Olivia felt that she was already an adult. Her experiences had become deeper. This was not just a simple childish infatuation. She realized the seriousness of her feelings. Olivia couldn't understand why she hadn't known about this before. The feelings she now understood had previously seemed new and surprising. She couldn't get the answers she needed through interrogation. Another way had to be found that would reveal the whole truth. Daniel said there is no pain greater than unrequited love, and now Olivia must understand who caused her suffering. Olivia couldn't understand how to get the maid to tell her about the man who was so important to her and why she refused to talk about it. The novella probably mentioned this moment. You just had to concentrate and try to remember the important details. After some time, Olivia realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't remember what had happened in Daisy's life in the novella. It was as if everything had vanished from her memory. Events that did not concern her simply flew out of her head, leaving no trace, as if they had never existed at all. But as for herself, and all the events connected with her, Olivia remembered clearly, as if it were all recorded in her memory. In the novel, her character was negative. She was the one who interfered with the main character and created problems. A stupid and helpless puppet who was used by the main villain to carry out his plans and spite the prince. All this happened in order to annoy the prince. It was the villain who pushed her to act against the main character. Olivia was kidnapped, and she thought it was all over, that her life ended in that moment. But at the very last moment, the main character appeared and saved her, changing her fate. Thus was sown the seed of love that became the basis for her participation in history, despite her secondary role. Olivia was just a minor villain she suffered, but her role in the story was limited. Unsurprisingly, her storyline didn't last long, and her involvement was very minor. Daisy was talking to her mistress, but suddenly fell silent, which aroused Olivia's interest, who decided to find out what her maid was thinking about. Olivia said it didn't matter, although what she was really thinking was that in the novella, her character barely spoke to the maid. Now it became clear why Olivia didn't remember anything about Daisy. They were just minor characters in someone else's story. They were just episodes in the story. The villains and heroes were much more significant figures for the entire novel. Olivia didn't even know that Daisy was so good at embroidery. It was a surprise to her. The maid remarked that she needed to finish her work, and said that even the bunnies she had embroidered turned out cute. Olivia corrected her, saying that they should be roses, not rabbits as she thought. The maid remarked that Olivia probably did enjoy embroidery, although not as much as she did. They say that if a woman gives a man a handkerchief, it will be a symbol of her recognition and feelings. However, the scarf that Olivia embroidered was so unsuccessful that she decided to give it to her father or brother, and not to anyone else. Olivia asked who Daisy was planning to give the handkerchief to, assuming she was embroidering it for a gentleman. Daisy began to explain that, of course, it was not for a gentleman, but simply because she wanted to give a gift. She even said that she wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that she was the best seamstress on the entire server, and that she embroidered her scarf for her brother and father. Although she doubted that they would appreciate such a gift, since it was not made exactly as a gift for a man, Olivia assumed her bow was a knight, which scared Daisy greatly because she didn't want anyone to guess. Olivia said that she embroidered a shield with an eagle, which is the symbol of the Red Knights, which surprised Daisy even more. Daisy quickly corrected her, clarifying that it was simply a talisman that she wanted to give to her brother. Olivia was sure that this symbol belonged to the Red Knights, but she decided that she would not give it to Daniel. Olivia increasingly doubted that she had assessed the situation correctly, and did not know what to do in the future if everything changed. She certainly had no intention of giving Daniel her handkerchief, considering it a gift far inferior to what she could have offered. Olivia knew she could never reach Daisy's level of skill. She could never be that skilled. Olivia resumed her training, meticulously refining every element. She spared no effort in striving for perfection in her skills. Her father and brother watched her actions. Her father thought it might be too early for such stress and intense training. Kyle, however, had a different opinion, believing that it was high time for Olivia to start preparing, as she would soon be joining the academy. He believed that this was the moment to test whether she was truly worthy of this step. Olivia continued practicing with the mannequins, with great skill, when her brother approached her. He was quite impressed with her skills. Kyle praised her and gently patted her on the shoulder, noting that she was really doing well. He drew his sword and said that she still had much to learn, and that today he would not hold back his strength. Olivia realized that her brother was now serious, and that this time it would not be easy for him. Kyle immediately rushed to attack, but Olivia managed to block his blow, showing her readiness for a serious fight. The father was very scared when he saw them fighting, and asked Kyle to be careful and not get carried away with force. Olivia, however, understood perfectly well that her brother was not holding back his power and was hitting for real, sparing no effort. At that moment, she decided to show her brother what she was capable of, and she became very determined, ready for a tough fight. The brother was even a little scared when he saw how quickly she dodged and rushed past him. Olivia was already behind her brother, and seizing the opportunity, knocked the sword out of his hands. She was pleased with her victory. However, at that moment, she noticed that something was wrong with her sword. A strange red aura began to emanate from it. Olivia was confused, not understanding what was happening and why this aura was appearing now. At that moment, she remembered that she had gone down into the dungeon with her father and brother, but why remained a mystery. Her father handed her a small chest and said that inside there was something important intended especially for her. Inside was an antique ring that my father said had been passed down in their family for generations as part of the family heritage. He asked her to put on this ring immediately, explaining that it played an important role in her destiny. Olivia wasn't quite sure what the object was, but when the ring began to glow, her confusion only increased. Kyle explained that the ring was a weapon with magical powers, and that it had chosen her as its bearer. Olivia still didn't understand how she should use this ring to make it her weapon in battle. Her father explained that by putting her energy into the ring, she could transform it into a weapon that would give her power. Now she began to realize that this ring could really help her in the future, perhaps in the most difficult situations. Her father asked her to come over and try to direct her energy into the eagle symbol on the ring to test its power. Olivia wondered why she had to do this. She believed that only the head of the family deserved such an honor. But her father explained that their family was special, that magical power flowed in their blood, which meant that this secret was passed on to her. It was a Versace family tradition to pass on the legacy through generations. Olivia couldn't understand why she had been chosen, but perhaps she would soon receive an answer when the ring began to respond to her energy. At that moment, everything began to glow. Olivia was shocked to see that the Versace family book contained knowledge that would be passed on to her descendants. The book told the story of how the war began 12 years ago, and how Emperor Kamahil I took the throne of Deucalion. The emperor divided the empire into 4 provinces: Sabinus in the east, Krashan in the west, independent lands in the south, and Versace in the north. In those years, the patrician Versace, the red-feathered eagle who led the troops, gained fame. She chose the red eagle as her symbol, and with this banner, she led her troops to the front, winning victories. However, after the end of the war, the nobility turned away from her, not recognizing a woman in the role of a commander. The imperial family also looked with suspicion on the Versace family, and only other members of the family were called to the capital. They tried to get closer to the aristocracy, but the patrician remained in her county, refusing offers from the capital. Later, she got married, but her happiness was short-lived, and the capital's Versaces became victims of betrayal. Patricia returned north and revived the Order of the Red Eagle, seeking to regain her lost strength. It was only 2 years later that the emperor acknowledged her services, paying tribute to her for her loyalty and wisdom in restoring order. Noble families could only marry those of equal status, and despite their merits, patricians remained in the status of concubines. The red-feathered eagle attracted the emperor's attention, but he did not agree to marry her. Patricia took her place next to the emperor, becoming his concubine, and this caused a deep shock to Olivia. She could not understand why such unfair treatment was shown to her ancestress. Olivia suddenly lost it and burst into shouts that the emperor was a real bastard. She recalled how the patrician had dedicated her entire life to serving the empire, and he had humiliated her by turning her into a mere concubine, ignoring her merits and virtues. Olivia's anger knew no bounds, and she declared the emperor a true monster. Her indignation and resentment for the patrician grew with each passing minute, and she was literally seething with rage. Kyle noted that such people were common in the capital. However, his father added that there were exceptions, noting that his mother, Cecilia, would never have done such a thing. He emphasized that Cecilia, known as the true beauty of the Argon family, was far from being like the others. Her dignity and principles stood apart from the capital's elite. Cecilia bore a double surname, Argon de Colin, and the patrician was the last remaining member of the Argon line. Kyle agreed that despite this, the emperor was an extremely vile man. Kyle suddenly noticed that imperial blood flowed through their veins too. This was a shocking revelation for Olivia, and it seemed Kyle himself hadn't known it. Her father told Olivia to continue reading, but she categorically refused, claiming that the more she read, the angrier she became. This did nothing to improve her mood. Kyle chuckled and teased her, saying he was simply shocked by her. He implied that she was genuinely curious about what would happen next, which only increased her irritation. The text mentioned that Patricia Kamahila's first request was for the title of border guard. It was an important position, symbolizing her commitment to protecting the empire. She also expressed a desire to be given the right to carry the imperial banner and to take a blood oath, which would strengthen her ties to the imperial crown and confirm her loyalty. Although the Versaces retained the title of Count, their position as guardians of the borders allowed the family to enjoy respect and status comparable to that of marquises. Since then, the Versace family has become a symbol of the protection of the empire and the imperial family unwaveringly fulfilling its mission even in the most difficult times. The right to carry the imperial banner gave the Versace family the ability to station their troops in the capital to protect the emperor in the event of military conflicts or uprisings. The blood oath prohibited family members from marrying into the imperial dynasty. Surprisingly, even centuries later, the text of the decree remained in the archives. Olivia thought about it and noticed that such gifts, if you think about it, looked more like burdensome duties than privileges, and only increased dependence on the crown. Her father confirmed her words, explaining that this was a cunning move by the emperor. He granted ostensible rights, but in doing so, he protected himself by strengthening his power and defense. On the other hand, the current situation made the Versace family virtually untouchable. Their status became so significant that any attempt to influence them seemed impossible. Olivia believed their position entailed something more. In her view, the Versace family was obligated not only to maintain its authority, but also to protect the emperor at all costs. This is indeed true. The Versace family enjoyed such a level of trust that they could send their troops into the capital at any moment. The imperial family considered them reliable allies, which made this bond even stronger. Patricia, for her part, showed herself to be extremely wise. With her decision, she effectively secured the imperial family's patronage over Versace. It was a stroke of genius. Olivia's father considered it important for his daughter to carefully review the final lines of the document. He emphasized that this clause was crucial and could influence future actions. The document stated that the Versace family was obligated to protect the imperial family, even if that meant challenging its authority. The responsibility was enormous. Meanwhile, Leonardo was minding his own business. He was suddenly interrupted by Giorgio, who entered the room. He looked strange, and Leonardo immediately sensed that something was wrong. Giorgio looked agitated. Leonardo thought it was probably another letter, and that was the cause of his concern. The crown prince was already irritated, but Giorgio began to explain. It turned out the girl had written again about her illness, and since then, there had been no word from her. Giorgio admitted he didn't know what to do. He felt the girl might be seriously ill, perhaps even on the verge of death, since she wasn't responding. Leonardo merely sighed. He considered the empire fortunate that he was the heir, and not Giorgio, who was too emotional for such a responsibility. Nevertheless, he suggested that his cousin consider the situation for himself. Leonardo believed that Giorgio needed to look at things objectively. Leonardo pointed out that he was writing the girl long letters and only receiving a few lines in response. This seemed strange, and spoke of her indifference. To clarify the situation, he asked how many letters Giorgio had already sent. Giorgio counted and reported that he had sent 2 or 3 letters. The girl responded only with a brief message about her illness, after which she fell silent. Leonardo was amazed that Giorgio remembered her words verbatim. He remarked that his cousin had a good memory, but emphasized that if she had been truly interested, she would have responded. Leonardo tried to convince Giorgio that after 3 letters and no response, he had to admit the obvious. The girl didn't care. He needed to realize that. Giorgio disagreed. He insisted Leonardo didn't know the girl. In his view, her silence didn't at all indicate indifference. He insisted that a few lines were enough to convey love. The crown prince thought Giorgio had completely lost his head over this girl. But Leonardo couldn't accept such arguments. He felt they were a clear sign of indifference, and that Giorgio was simply deceiving himself. Giorgio, however, had a different opinion. He believed that even a few words could show concern. That was the thing about her that made him love her. Leonardo realized that Giorgio was truly in love. His feelings were sincere, even though Leonardo believed the romance was doomed. Giorgio began to talk about how he couldn't take his eyes off Olivia because she was the embodiment of perfection. His gaze was captivated by her grace, beauty, and confidence. Leonardo, openly angry, declared that Giorgio was forbidden from entering the palace. He was ordered to leave immediately and never return. Kyle looked at the girl carefully, wondering if she understood where this was really heading. His question was full of doubt and hidden anxiety. Olivia assumed Kyle was hinting at their incredible good fortune. However, deep down, she knew the situation was far from happy. The girl thought the north was much safer than the capital, but her thoughts instantly shifted. Now was not the time to dwell on places. Kyle was irritated by Olivia's inability to figure out who her grandmother resembled. Her ignorance seemed almost offensive to him, but he kept his emotions in check. Kyle's father asked him not to pressure her. Instead, he suggested giving Olivia time to think things over and come to the right conclusions. Olivia suddenly realized that the patrician bore an uncanny resemblance to her. This thought was a revelation that her father immediately seized upon, noting their resemblance. They were indeed of the same blood, their facial features and mannerisms were almost identical. Unlike others, this thought proved crucial to realizing the truth. Patricia Versace. Olivia caught herself thinking that woman would have made a wonderful leading lady, so charismatic and strong. Olivia couldn't understand why she of all people had ended up in this novella. The fate predestined for her seemed too tragic and unfair. She also had no idea how many secrets her family was hiding. These details were omitted from the original story, making it even more mysterious. The details of her backstory felt odd. It was an unexpected narrative twist that added depth, but also raised questions. All the events around seemed isolated, as if they had been filmed on a carefully guarded set, hidden from prying eyes. Everything outside the visible picture seemed non-existent. Whatever wasn't in frame lost its significance and seemed to dissolve into the void. Outside the lens, the world seemed non-existent. This strange sensation added to the absurdity of the scene, forcing one to question the nature of reality. Now, however, everything seemed real. Even the ring on her hand no longer felt like a fantasy, but like a very real object. The ring was most likely intended for the protagonist, but Olivia couldn't remember it being mentioned in the original story. Usually, when someone finds themselves in a novel, an entity appears to explain what's happening. But no one had encountered it, and that seemed odd. Perhaps this entity did appear to her in a dream, but the girl simply didn't remember it. Her memory could have failed her at the most crucial moment. Despite everything, Olivia didn't care. She decided to live her life the way she wanted. She wasn't afraid of predetermined fate, and she intended to change her destiny. She dreamed of a luxurious house with a green garden. Her future no longer included caring for her brother, whom she considered unreasonable and stubborn. Olivia planned to find a handsome man and build happiness. Meanwhile, her father sat with Kyle, wondering if they were doing the right thing. Olivia is soon to leave for the academy, and her father, despite his outward calm, is well aware that this place is fraught with many dangers. He worries for his daughter. 3 months passed. Autumn had arrived, and the leaves began to fall. Olivia stood by the window, gazing thoughtfully into the distance. Her thoughts were far from this picture. Without taking her eyes off the window, Olivia turned to Oscar and calmly said that she had an important matter that required his attention. Oscar, busy with his own affairs, looked at her and clarified that he was a little busy. However, the lady unexpectedly suggested that he imagined she had confessed her feelings to him and asked his reaction. Oscar was taken aback by the unexpectedness, and thoughts began to swarm in his head about what he could have done to deserve such a strange turn of the conversation. Olivia was stunned by his reaction. Did she really look that stern? Despite her doubts, she asked if he would refuse her in a similar situation. Oscar smiled and remarked that he hoped the lady didn't think Daniel had gone to the border because he didn't like her. Olivia couldn't help but chuckle mentally, noting that Oscar was more perceptive than she had expected. However, she understood that it was better to have such conversations personally with Daniel because he was a person of a completely different nature than Oscar. Later, Olivia approached Oscar again. She proposed the idea of opening another branch in Demir to expand the business. She continued to develop the idea to build a new plant and open 3 retail outlets in the east, or better yet 5, to cover a larger territory. Oscar chuckled and stated bluntly that the lady was simply taking it out on him, dissatisfied with his answer to her previous question. Olivia categorically denied his assumption and assured him that his answer was entirely appropriate. However, if he felt that way, he could propose. The lady, grinning, added that they could open a branch in the west, too. Oscar jokingly replied that she needn't have worried. Daniel clearly liked her. This was true, but Olivia knew that for 3 months now, Daniel had been avoiding her, as if they barely knew each other. The conversation at the lake changed a lot. Daniel said then that confessing his feelings was not worth it. It would only complicate their relationship. After that, Olivia focused entirely on training and tried to distance herself from him to drown out her feelings. Daniel couldn't go with her to the academy, so he decided to go to the border to join the land guard. He spent all this time away from her, and for months he did not write her a single line, as if he was trying to forget. Before they couldn't spend a day without each other, but now they seemed almost like strangers. These changes were hard to comprehend, but the fact remained. Their connection seemed to have been destroyed. Oscar didn't understand why the lady didn't take the first step and write to Daniel herself. Olivia, slightly irritated, said she was busy. Oscar was so surprised by this answer that he froze in place. Olivia glanced at Oscar and snapped that she was fed up with his staring. She asked him to leave, not wanting to continue the conversation. At the Versace estate, preparations were bustling for the important event. The crown ordered troops to defend the borders from threats. The family allocated 5 regiments. 2 were sent directly to the border and 3 to the dangerous dark forest. Olivia's father and brother decided to personally accompany the troops, demonstrating courage and dedication to their duty. Daniel, who could not abandon his obligations, also went with them. Olivia's heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. She wished her father good luck, hiding her excitement behind a mask of calm. Her father hugged her gratefully goodbye, and Kyle noticed the handkerchief in her hands, deciding that it was meant for him. However, upon closer inspection, he saw an embroidered chicken and began to doubt his assumptions. Olivia shouted loudly that if he didn't like the gift, he didn't have to take it. But Kyle replied that gifts weren't returned. Daisy in turn said goodbye to her brother and handed him her handkerchief as a talisman. Then Olivia approached, looking confident and composed despite her nervousness. Daniel looked at her and asked how she was feeling, expecting a short answer. Olivia, as always, replied that she was fine and wished him luck on his trip. Daniel, a little embarrassed, apologized for everything that happened between them. However, without waiting for an answer, he jumped on his horse and quickly rode away, as if avoiding further conversation. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in Crown Prince Leonardo's office. There was so much work that he didn't know where to begin. The servant offered him some tea to take his mind off things and relax a bit. But the prince, waving his hand, ordered tea to be brought for Gerald, who looked completely exhausted. He was also informed that the Marquis had arrived. Leonardo prepared for the meeting. Giorgio practically burst into the office, beaming with joy. The prince wondered why he always felt embarrassed when he saw him smile. He had a strange feeling that Giorgio was deliberately creating this tension. However, he was forced to accept the guest. Giorgio happily announced that he had received a reply letter from his beloved, which aroused genuine interest in the prince. In the letter, Olivia stated that she had written before and added that she hated texting. She explained that she preferred not to communicate through letters, which made them tiring for her. Leonardo was completely perplexed. He couldn't figure out if that was really all she'd written to him, and he kept wondering if he'd missed something important in her words. Giorgio remarked that he'd always been afraid she wouldn't like him, but he realized Olivia simply didn't like writing. Her handwriting looked illegible and didn't make much sense. Her handwriting was extremely difficult to decipher. However, she was a countess, and even her sloppy notes were important because she belonged to high society. Leonardo turned to his friend, but noticing his doubts, suggested that he might introduce him to another lady if Olivia was not as interesting to him as he had hoped. Giorgio firmly replied that she was simply tired and shouldn't take her words so seriously. He believed there was no need to pay attention to all this, especially not to overdramatize it. Leonardo was surprised and asked if he really thought he was delusional. After all, he was in love with a girl who clearly didn't feel the same way about him, and he couldn't ignore that. He suggested Leonardo meet someone else, but the Marquis replied that he had no need for that. He had no intention of wasting time on acquaintances if his heart was set on Olivia alone. Giorgio was handsome, charming, and elegant, the embodiment of high manners and refined taste. This made him attractive to those around him, despite his concern for Olivia's feelings. Leonardo, however, noticed that Giorgio was making quite the opposite impression. His manners and appearance didn't evoke the emotions he'd expected when discussing such an important matter. Giorgio became angry and began to protest, insisting that he and Olivia were in love, and that he couldn't understand why Leonardo couldn't see it. He was confident in his feelings and didn't want to hide it. Olivia asked if anyone in her entourage had been offended. She also inquired whether the field surgeon had sufficient supplies for the army, and if not, she should send a wagon to fetch them to resolve the issue. The girl also asked her maid if she had packed everything she needed for the cold weather. Daisy informed her that everything had already been sent and there shouldn't have been any delays. Hard times were approaching, and the girl reminded people that savings shouldn't be wasted if they could be used for more important goals. In such moments, saving was unwise, especially in times of uncertainty. Olivia asked Sir Haman to send the artifact makers 20 monster trophies from their warehouse. She wanted them to be crafted into magical amulets to help combat future threats. Oscar was outraged by her decision, believing that creating simple amulets from such trophies was simply foolish. He was certain that these trophies could be sold for a large sum of money and significantly improve his financial situation. He believed these trophies were of immense value and could be sold. He was certain that even within a month, if these items were managed properly, they could be used to provide for the entire estate. But the lady replied that frosts were coming, and she believed they should be saved for more important purposes. The season had been harsh, and she didn't want to risk wasting the spoils on something that wouldn't bring immediate benefit. The winter promised to be very harsh, and she insisted that everyone take her decision seriously. The girl was prepared for difficult times and preferred to be cautious rather than recklessly squandering resources. Oscar said it would be better to teach the maid how to manage her belongings. He considered wasting precious trophies on amulets odd and unjustified. Daisy replied with a smile that her mistress knew best how to manage her money. She had no doubt about her decision and believed it was the best choice in the situation, despite Oscar's opinion. Oscar, still dissatisfied, said he would have found better uses for the trophies himself. He would have been more practical hiring workers to use them for more useful purposes, not to create amulets. He also asked Daisy if she had spoken to the lady about this matter. He was certain the topic required a more serious approach than simply agreeing with her decisions. The gentleman suggested it would be best to tell Olivia right now, before she became too immersed in work. He believed it was worth raising the issue before she became too busy with other matters. Olivia replied that she simply didn't want to be a nuisance. She didn't feel the need to repeat her requests and thoughts. Oscar said she was simply making excuses, as Daisy knew perfectly well how much her mistress cared for her. She needed no reminders, and all her actions were dictated by concern for their future. The dark forest was engulfed in a brutal struggle. Imperial troops spent 2 weeks liberating it from the monsters that roamed the area. Every morning, they prepared for new battles. Warrior spirit united the soldiers, uniting them with a common goal. All attention was focused on victory, and this gave each fighter the determination and strength to move forward, despite fatigue. Daniel joined the 3rd Knights Battalion without hesitation. It was a major step for him, and he knew it would change his life forever. The battalion was renowned for its fighting prowess. This battalion was at the forefront. The most determined and experienced fighters fought in its ranks. Kyle, the commander, thought Daniel needed rest, as the boy had barely slept. Kyle was worried about his health, but Daniel insisted he was sleeping well and didn't need rest. He was determined and ready to keep fighting. Kyle, though he disagreed, understood that there was more to his resolve. Kyle reminded Daniel that he needed to take care of himself, as Olivia was deeply worried about him. Kyle was certain she cared about his well-being. This concern made him more attentive. Lately, Daniel and Olivia's relationship had become more distant. It was noticeable on her part, and she likely gave her scarf to the Marquise to somehow lift his spirits. Suddenly, Kyle asked Daniel if he knew who had stolen his scarf. This took Daniel by surprise, and he immediately began asking questions, trying to figure out whether his sister had actually made the scarf. Kyle noted that perhaps the handkerchief wasn't that important, but he could still return it to Daniel. He admitted it wasn't the most exquisite, but it was significant nonetheless, and could serve as a talisman. "It has a beak, wings, and a look just like Olivia's," Kyle said, noting that the scarf was unusual. Daniel, hearing this, realized it wasn't just an object, but a symbol, something important for his future. At that moment, Daniel realized the scarf depicted an eagle. This symbol became a powerful moment of realization for him, and he felt a certain responsibility being placed upon him. Mikhail advised Daniel not to stain the handkerchief with blood during the battle, and to remember the importance of its safety. He also reminded him to always tuck it under his sleeve to avoid losing it or damaging it. Daniel smiled. It was the first time he had worn the amulet Olivia had made. In that moment, he felt connected to her, and the feeling gave him strength. Kyle reiterated that Daniel needed to take care of himself. Otherwise, Olivia would be very worried. He said that if he couldn't take care of himself, there was always someone who would help. "You can't be without a talisman," Daniel said. He believed in the power of this symbol, and so passed on his own talisman to Kyle. It was an important decision he made to protect himself and his loved ones. The scarf Daisy had sewn was now in Daniel's possession. He felt it symbolized their relationship and connection with their family. Now he was ready to take responsibility for his own destiny and the destiny of those dear to him. Now they were even. But suddenly, a man entered their tent. He handed Daniel a letter, which he immediately responded to with interest. It was unclear what the message was. Daniel turned to the man and asked what had happened. He immediately realized this wasn't just a letter being delivered, and his heart began to pound with excitement. Perhaps this was a sign from Olivia. The man reported that a messenger had delivered a letter. Daniel felt a slight sense of unease, but was also glad to have received the news. He didn't know who might have sent the letter, but he soon received a reply. Daniel eagerly wanted to know who the letter was from. However, before he could examine it, Kyle snatched it from his hands. This was the moment when their interaction became more tense. Daniel tried to explain that it was a personal letter and asked Kyle to be more careful. He was surprised at how quickly Kyle intervened, but he also realized he had his reasons. Kyle quickly read the letter and immediately realized it was from Olivia. Daniel felt his heart flutter. This message was important, and he wanted to see its contents as soon as possible. Daniel grabbed the letter and began reading quickly. He saw Olivia's words, saying she didn't want him to get into dangerous situations. Her words warmed him, and he understood how much she cared. In the letter, Olivia also asked him to take care of himself. This was certainly her message, and Daniel felt his resolve strengthen. He promised himself he would be careful for her sake. Daniel shared his decision with Kyle. He explained that he had decided to transfer from the Vanguard to avoid unnecessary risks. This decision was based on his desire to protect himself for Olivia and his loved ones. Olivia's childhood was spent in the shadows of vague memories. She barely remembered anything from that time, but vague images of the past still lingered in her mind like shadows from another world. Olivia was born when Kyle was just 4 years old. The little girl brought light into the house, but she was too young to understand how her arrival changed her family's life. Daniel was always by Kyle's side, supporting and protecting him like true brothers. From a very early age, they were inseparable, sharing every joy and challenge in their childhood. They practiced fencing together. Enjoying the company of friends, Daisy was always nearby, joining them in these games, creating an atmosphere of happiness and fun. When Olivia joined the family, life continued along the same path. However, time moved on and changes occurred with each passing day, even if they remained unnoticed. 6 years after Olivia's birth, tragedy struck. Countess Cecilia died. This event deeply shocked everyone leaving them with profound grief and a sense of loss. The Countess's death had a profound effect on everyone, especially the Count, who lost the ability to smile, while Kyle seemed to avoid Olivia hiding his pain behind aloofness. When Olivia turned 16, Kyle and his father returned from the border. It was a momentous return full of unexpected emotions as they reunited with Olivia, now almost a woman. Upon seeing Olivia, they immediately felt her striking resemblance to their late mother. This trait made their gazes freeze, as if she were an extension of what they had so deeply lost. At that moment, something in the air changed. Everything around her grew colder, and even her body felt the chill. Olivia felt a strange uneasiness wash over her. When she saw snow falling outside, her face darkened. She realized that training would be canceled today, and a feeling of anxiety about her health didn't leave her. Olivia wondered what Kyle would say in such a situation. He would probably dissuade her from resting, saying the weather wasn't a hindrance to training, since the enemies wouldn't wait. Olivia couldn't help but smile as she thought about how she wasn't a kung fu master to practice even in the snow, and how much more important it was for her to stay in good health than to expose herself to unnecessary risks. Keeping her body in good condition was her priority, and she wasn't about to take unnecessary risks, even though she understood the importance of training for her development. The butler entered and greeted Olivia kindly, asking where she was headed. He was always attentive and ready to offer her assistance in any endeavor. Olivia replied that she was going to the music room, and the butler offered to accompany her, showing his courtesy and desire to be useful. He also suggested lighting the fireplace to make it warmer, but Olivia noticed that the hall was still a little chilly, although this could not spoil her plans. The hall was just as she remembered it. It was a place where her mother had often spent time, and it still held memories of those days. Everything was just like it had been many years ago when Olivia was taking her first steps in the world of dance learning from those closest to her, Kyle, Daisy, and Daniel. These memories were dear to her, and every corner of the hall was full of significance, reminding her of the time when she was still a child, but already felt a taste for life. A portrait of the parents hung in the hall, capturing their beauty and elegance. Gerard Versace and Cecilia Argandecalin, captured in the painting, seemed to inhabit this image. The portrait was painted before Cecilia's marriage, and her maiden name was written on the painting. It was a reminder of her past, which remained alive within these walls. Olivia was simply stunned when she first saw this portrait. Its elegance and beauty overwhelmed her, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the image of her mother. She couldn't understand how she had managed to change her appearance so much, losing the natural beauty that had been her mother's. It remained a mystery to her. Looking herself over, Olivia realized she really did look a lot like her mother. It hadn't been so obvious before, but now the resemblance was clear and noticeable. Olivia hadn't sat at the piano in a long time. She chose a piece by Bach, an aria, in G major, and began to play, remembering how her older brother often played this music for her as a child. Her brother dreamed of becoming a famous pianist and always played this song for her. He strived for his goal, and she often listened, admiring his talent and the emotion he poured into his music. When she started playing, Olivia thought she could follow in his footsteps. They often played together as children, and although their parents made fun of their duet, it was a fun time for everyone. Over the years, Olivia's brother continued to pursue his dream of becoming a musician, but she decided to take a different path and began studying martial arts, particularly kendo, which became her new passion. Soon her brother left to pursue his dream of attending a music academy. This was a significant moment for her, as she already understood the importance of pursuing her goals like he did. When Olivia was just entering her second year of high school, her brother unexpectedly committed suicide. He jumped from the roof of the academy, leaving her and her parents horrified and shocked by what had happened. The police claimed it was suicide caused by academic difficulties and emotional problems. However, for her and her parents, this was difficult to understand, as her brother had always seemed strong and happy. Olivia's brother was so devoted to music, giving it his all and always full of joy and inspiration. This loss has deeply affected everyone in the family, especially her, as he was her support system. Olivia couldn't understand how her brother could do such a thing. She couldn't believe he'd committed suicide. It was a complete surprise to her, and it haunted her for a long time. The parents also couldn't believe what had happened. It was a terrible blow to the family, and they couldn't come to terms with the fact that their son and brother had gone like this, leaving a void in their lives. Times had turned dark in their home. The sounds of the piano, once beloved, now brought only bitter memories, and each of them tried to cope with this excruciating sense of loss. The entire house remained the same, except for my brother's room, which remained permanently locked. Everyone tried to avoid the memories it evoked, as if the door to the past remained closed. But the Countess's hall didn't cease to attract her attention. She continued to visit it, and music became more than just sounds for her, but a way to feel the breath of life that returned through these notes. Kyle and his father always enjoyed it when she played the piano for them. Music was connected to the memory of the Countess for them, and they felt it helped keep her presence alive in their lives. Despite all these connections to the past, Olivia couldn't understand why they, unlike her parents, enjoyed music. For her, music was a source of pain and loss, but for them, it was something that gave strength. Olivia refused to accept the idea that her brother had left of his own free will. She couldn't accept that he had chosen to take his own life, and her heart was filled with pain and unanswered questions. Music opened other doors for Olivia. When she played the piano, she tried to overcome her grief to escape reality, wanting her parents to understand at least a little bit what she was feeling. As she played, she hoped that her parents might hear the music and feel everything she was going through. She wanted them to share her feelings, even if words couldn't express them. The head designer Julien was thrilled to finally reach the Versace family estate. It was a significant event as his visit was his first since the Countess's passing, and it was a sign of respect for her memory. He was the first guest allowed into the hall after her departure. It was a sign of deep respect for the family and its traditions, as only the closest relatives were allowed to be there. At that moment, a woman approached Julien, and he was surprised to see that it was his mistress. She greeted him, which was unexpected and in some ways even unusual for him. The man was stunned to realize it was his mistress standing before him. This was something new for him, and he hadn't expected such a turn of events when he first met her in this hall. He greeted the lady politely and bowed to her as a sign of respect. This was his act of respect, for he knew how important a figure she was to this place. His name was Julien, and he was tasked with preparing the outfit she wore upon entering the academy. It was an important assignment, and he understood its significance for her future. Olivia called Julien because she really liked the proposed design, and she didn't feel any need to be shy about seeing how he would bring her ideas to life. Julien began to say that it was a great honor for him to work with such a woman. He was a little embarrassed, as he hadn't expected Olivia to show such interest in his work. Julien had heard rumors about the Duchess's large frame and tall stature. Olivia was 170 centimeters tall, but he hadn't imagined she would be so impressive in size and appearance. Olivia asked about a corset for the outfit, but Julien refused, explaining that he had already created a similar design before and did not think it was necessary to add this element to the new one. He noted that a corset was definitely not necessary for such an outfit. Instead, he asked her to wait a little as he wanted to carefully work out the details and offer something truly unique. Julien decided to highlight Olivia's natural curves, placing particular emphasis on her neckline so that the outfit would perfectly complement her figure and highlight her best features. Olivia turned to her maid and suggested that she look at the proposed brochure, for now, hoping that it would help her make a more informed decision about the design. After some time, Julien finally announced that he had completed the sketch. He eagerly awaited Olivia's reaction, as every stroke was important to him. He apologized sincerely to Olivia, explaining that when inspiration strikes him, he needs to immediately put all his thoughts down on paper so as not to miss important moments. Olivia asked if she could see the finished work, and Julien began to explain that for an evening dress, it would be better to choose a simpler flared hem, avoiding excessive embellishment. Olivia expressed doubts about this simple option, stating that she needed something more expressive, and suggested choosing darker shades to highlight her strong features. After that, she continued evaluating outfits, choosing and rejecting one after another until she reached a decision. She was determined to find the perfect option that would highlight her style and personality. However, at some point, Olivia settled on one design. She asked Julien not to continue, stating that the outfit suited her perfectly and that she wanted to stick with it. Julien, seeing her reaction, noted with satisfaction that he was sure Olivia would like this design. He was sure she would look stunning in this outfit. Olivia confirmed her choice, saying that she really liked the design and wished the outfit was done in a bright red color to make it more striking. He said it would be simply magnificent, and that if the back were a little exposed, it would be much more beautiful. The mistress didn't want to agree, but he began to say it was a sin to hide such a back, even for Mistress Olivia herself. Julien was certain that Olivia's back was simply mesmerizing. In his eyes, she was a true Nefertiti goddess of war and art, her figure oozing strength and grace. However, Olivia didn't agree with him. She still insisted on her own way, wanting everything to remain as she had said earlier. She was unwavering in her decision. Despite her insistence, Julien didn't give in. He continued to persuade her, telling her it was his deepest desire and request. He begged her to at least consider it. Olivia, however, showed no interest. It was her back, and if anyone tried to touch it, she wouldn't approve. She held her ground. In response, Olivia asked what would happen if she did things her way and showed him exactly what she meant. She drew something that represented her solution to the situation. Julien was amazed by her resourcefulness. He recognized that Lady Olivia was a true genius. Her ideas were astounding. He realized how unusual her approach was. Olivia asked when she would be able to see the results of his work. Julien reassured her, promising she would receive it as soon as possible. He wasn't going to keep her waiting. He called her his muse, expressing admiration, and asked her to wait a little. Olivia, without resistance, agreed, and then said goodbye to him, letting him go with a light heart. The main goal of this business was to open a tailoring franchise, and Olivia decided to ask Daisy about a name for the store. She suggested La LeBlanc. Daisy replied that she would be busy for the next 5 months. She would be heading to Tamir to open 5 stores in the eastern region. It was no easy task. Olivia was surprised to hear that Daisy already knew everything. She hadn't yet had time to tell her about her plans, but the maid seemed to possess some kind of special intuition. Olivia wanted to send Julian, but she knew he didn't know the proper etiquette. They didn't need any trouble, so only Daisy could handle the task. Daisy, however, was confident that Julian could handle it alone. She believed he was capable of selling clothes, even to a monster from the dark forest. So confident was he? Olivia remarked that Daisy might be struggling. However, the maid replied that it wasn't just difficult, it was actually extremely challenging. The tasks were overwhelming. Olivia acknowledged her wit, but it wasn't a joke. She seriously suggested that Daisy teach Julian manners and etiquette. It would be beneficial for his development. Daisy agreed, noting that the etiquette teacher would likely be less busy than the mistress Oscar. In her opinion, shouldn't object to such a proposal. If another woman had been in charge, she would probably have objected, but Oscar believed that Olivia was the one who handled such matters best. She was experienced and a problem solver. It was she who created Le LeBlanc. She executed the project brilliantly and was finally able to relax and enjoy the rest she had long deserved. She found a letter from Daniel in her hands. He wrote that there was a lot of snow in this area right now, just as Lady Olivia had predicted, and that the snow had hit the vanguard, just as she had said. He also asked her not to overexert herself with training. This concern genuinely pleased Olivia. She read these words with pleasure. She understood that her concern for him was important to him. Daniel reported that it was snowing in his area too. The boots Mistress Olivia had sent him were very warm and comfortable. The snow reminded him of her eyes, pure and white as snowflakes. He also added that he might return home sooner than expected. Olivia was surprised when she read this, as she hadn't expected his return to be so imminent. At first she thought that it was about him perceiving her as cold, and that his return would not be as joyful as she would like. It was the last letter she received from him from China. It brought mixed feelings, but left an indelible mark on her soul. Olivia hadn't yet replied to the letter. She continued to ponder what he wanted to convey to her. She was preoccupied with her thoughts, unsure of how to respond. The letter from Daniel was in her hands, and Olivia felt her hands tremble slightly as she read his words. These letters always made her nervous, even when they were so simple. Daniel thanked her for always taking care of the supplies and always being supportive. His quick return meant he was doing a good job, and that made him happy. He mentioned that they would see each other next week. Olivia wondered why his letter seemed so formal. Perhaps he wanted to emphasize the importance of his mission. She thought that perhaps her own letter had been too burdensome for him, although she did not mean for it to be perceived that way. Olivia couldn't understand why her eyes were interpreted this way. She thought they were beautiful, but she couldn't understand how her face had such a profound impact on how people perceived her. He even signed the letter with his last name. The snow he wrote about penetrated her soul and brought a feeling of coldness to her heart, the same cold as outside. She dreamed of being born again, but she felt that would only bring more difficulties, and that the next life might be even more difficult than the present. In fact, she hadn't given up, deep down. She hoped that Daniel would return to this life, and that they could be together, despite all the difficulties. A week ago, before Olivia received the letter from Daniel, an important meeting took place in the dark forest that made her think about many things. Kyle asked Daniel what he was doing. Daniel continued rewriting the email he had sent second. He didn't like the way it sounded and decided to make some edits. He considered what part of the letter might make Miss Olivia uncomfortable so as not to offend her. He was concerned that his words might be misunderstood. Kyle read the letter and found nothing strange about it. But Daniel had a different opinion. In his opinion, the letter was too explicit and needed to be changed. He thought his emotions were expressed too vividly in the letter, especially in the lines about the snow and her eyes. It felt like a love letter, and he wasn't sure it was the right thing to write. Kyle pointed out that perhaps the letter wasn't what it seemed and suggested that Daniel just let it go, so as not to worry too much. He noticed that snow always brought cold, and this couldn't be a good sign. The snow squelched underfoot, creating an unpleasant sensation of chill. Daniel looked at the snow and thought it was white and fragile like her, as if comparing her to this winter phenomenon. It was a subtle and figurative gesture on his part. He considered simply writing her last name. A simple first name might feel burdensome, but adding a last name might make the letter less tense. Kyle noticed that Daniel was acting strange, and that he should just put the letter aside and rest. He suggested he get some sleep and not dwell on what he'd written. The man was shocked when he learned that Daisy and Oscar were going to Tamir. It was unexpected, and he couldn't believe the news. The secretary couldn't understand why they weren't taking him along. He tried to figure out the situation, but all he could do was complain about his lack of understanding. Oscar said he was very serious about the matter and suggested that his secretary go in his place. He was confident that he could handle the important task and carry it out at the highest level. Daisy was completely perplexed by Oscar's words. She couldn't understand how Sam could handle such a responsible job, which clearly required more experience and skill. She believed Sam was much more suited to the leadership position. This made sense, as his experience and abilities could be put to much better use in another role. Oscar asked with displeasure what kind of trick she was using, now noting that her words weren't funny at all. He wasn't in the mood for such jokes. Daisy remained perplexed, unable to understand what Oscar was talking about. She simply maintained that she was telling the truth and saw no point in his objections. The argument between them escalated to such an extent that the secretary even felt a little relieved. He was glad that the two were arguing, which gave him some relief. He thought that their quarrel was much better than the silence of Mrs. Olivia, who did not even ask whether she would take him with her without saying anything about her decision. The secretary said he didn't want to take their place, but only hoped they could all go together. He was ready to support their team, but he didn't want to be left out. He wished them a safe journey and, barely holding back his tears, hurried away, unable to stay with them in such an emotional situation. Oscar couldn't understand what had happened to him. He was shocked that the secretary had suddenly burst into tears and run away for no apparent reason. Daisy began to say that it was all because of Oscar. She blamed him, although she didn't know why he of all people could have caused such a strong emotional outburst in the secretary. Oscar couldn't understand how this could have anything to do with him. Daisy kept insisting that if anything went wrong, it was always Oscar's fault, even though he didn't know what he'd done wrong. The courtyard of the Versace Hotel. Here the important alibi information the gentleman had ordered was provided. He expected it would aid in the investigation. Giorgio showed a letter whose owner turned out to be the daughter of the Versace family. This was crucial evidence that could shed light on the events unfolding. Very little information was known about Olivia. All they knew was that she was an expert swordsman and rarely interacted with people, preferring to remain in the shadows. It also became known that Olivia personally manages her family's business and governs the province of Hershey. She was an influential figure in the region. The gentleman inquired about the north and assumed they were talking about the Hershey province. He was interested in this piece of information and awaited clarification. The city was very clean and well kept. It seemed as if people were living in abundance, enjoying a high standard of living and all the benefits of prosperity. Even in the poorest areas of the city, free hospitals were built, demonstrating a high level of social responsibility and concern for citizens. All of this completely contradicted the rumors circulating 3 years ago. Back then, people said the city was mired in poverty and disrepair. But now everything had changed for the better. The prince was surprised to learn that they had never met. This was not what he had expected, and he did not hide his amazement at this circumstance. Giorgio, with a serious expression, reported that Lady was feeling ill, which is why they couldn't meet. He explained that Olivia was feeling ill, which prevented their meeting. Giorgio tried to visit the sick woman, but Olivia, despite his entreaties, refused. She refused to accept visits and preferred to remain alone, not even opening the door for him. Apparently, Olivia had a high fever and was genuinely ill. In any case, her condition should improve, and as they say, they'll receive an answer tomorrow, that will allow the prince to meet her. Giorgio asked how he had learned this news. The prince replied that he had heard it by chance in a pub, but did not specify who had shared it with him. The prince expressed doubt that he should tell Giorgio that he had personally investigated the matter. Giorgio, however, remarked that he himself was planning to attend a party organized by the squad. The prince was stunned by her beauty and charm. Giorgio in turn asked him not to fall in love with Olivia when he met her the next day, as she was too attractive for that. The prince considered Giorgio odd, because even if Olivia had brought change to the world of Versace and Hershey, she wasn't someone who deserved such attention. Olivia was independent and self-sufficient. Olivia rejected Giorgio, considering him too stupid. The next day, the celebration began, and everyone around her was absorbed in preparations, oblivious to her refusal. It was incredibly awkward for the crown prince to stand in front of a stranger's door, especially on such an important day, when the whole situation was tense and unfamiliar to him. Olivia Versace stood beneath the enormous wings of a red falcon. The knights passed by her house, and Olivia watched their progress with pride, clearly feeling like an important figure in their world. Women in the area whispered that Lady Olivia was proud of her knights. For many, this was unbelievable, as no one expected her to be so young as to understand the significance of these events. Locals suspected that the idea of the knights was Olivia's own. It's unclear how she came up with it at such a young age, but her determination and leadership skills left no doubt. The prince recalled Giorgio talking about his inability to tear his eyes away from Olivia. He admitted that he knew she was beautiful, but nevertheless, he couldn't contain his admiration. Giorgio said that, despite everything, he couldn't help but stare at Olivia. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't do anything about it. Today, the prince wanted to apologize to Giorgio, realizing he had previously treated him like a madman. He acknowledged his mistake and was ready to apologize for his previous behavior. Everything Giorgio said turned out to be true. Olivia was exactly as described. Beautiful, intelligent, confident, and her every action confirmed it. Olivia was happy because her father and brother had returned home, and Daniel was with them. Tomorrow was her birthday, and she was ready to celebrate the moment surrounded by her loved ones. Olivia believed the news of her impending separation from her loved ones was exaggerated. However, once she finally accepted the fact, she thanked everyone for their support and understanding. After the tragic loss of her brother, Olivia never showed her pain. She was strong, and tears were not her way of coping with the loss, even if her soul was in agony. But now that her father had returned, Olivia couldn't resist throwing herself into his arms. Her joy was boundless, and she couldn't hide her feelings, finally feeling relieved. Everyone present was shocked by her behavior. Her father, slightly embarrassed, asked her to calm down and stop yelling. He returned home, and everything returned to its proper place. The prince was shocked to see such a scene. He watched Olivia, her father and brother, as well as Gerald, the Earl of the House, and Guardian of the Empire, which added even more importance to the moment. Also present at the moment were Daniel Meridian and Kyle Versace, known as true legends within the Academy. Their presence lent the entire situation even greater significance. People like them don't often show their feelings so openly in such places, yet they didn't hide their emotions, and this added a sincerity and humanity to the whole event. At this point, Giorgio, engrossed in his books, suddenly heard a sound outside the window. This caught his attention, and he sensed that something unusual was about to happen. It was Crown Prince Leonardo, who upon entering the room noticed the boy standing barefoot. He noticed that the young man had seen something, but didn't even understand what was being said. The Crown Prince noted that, although he had only seen the lady from afar, and briefly he had fortunately noticed that she had already recovered, and that everything seemed fine. This reassured him somewhat. Leonardo, lost in thought, turned to his cousin and expressed interest in what would happen if the lady for some reason chose another man instead of him. The thought somehow troubled him. He couldn't help but ask his cousin what he would do if the lady chose another man over him. It was a serious consideration that tormented him. Giorgio, after listening to him, responded with confidence that this couldn't be true, as the lady's taste was immutable. He was certain that her preferences would remain the same, despite any possible doubts. The Crown Prince, looking at his cousin in bewilderment, still couldn't understand why he was so sure of this. He asked him what he would do if the lady chose another, and he calmly replied that he could handle it. However, after thinking it over, Giorgio added that in that case he would have to get rid of the competitor. He was prepared to do anything to ensure he didn't suit her tastes, and if necessary, simply destroy him. Father congratulated everyone on their safe return. This banquet is top-notch, so they are all very happy. The pork is ready to eat, now it's probably ready, so it's worth cutting it up. Then they can eat it. Olivia said that she would go first and wished them a good evening and good night. But suddenly, someone addressed her, and she was surprised, turning back. It was Daniel. So she was scared for 2 months. She wanted to get closer to him. But no matter how you look at it, they have nothing to talk about with him, by the way. He has become even cooler. The crown prince thought his cousin was definitely crazy, and Giorgio was already thinking about what he would do with this man. He remarked that this guy was very lucky, and Giorgio began to say that it was just a joke. What he just said is not a joke, but the truth. That guy died, so he'll definitely think about protecting himself. Besides, if it's his girlfriend, he will fight for her. It's Giorgio, and he will do as he said, but if he were the crown prince, like gaining the powers of the north, marrying that lady is the most sensible decision. Then the crown prince caught himself thinking that he was thinking about something completely different from what he needed to be thinking about. Even if Giorgio is like that, the colored prince is also a little crazy. Olivia's 18th birthday arrived. The maids were simply delighted Mrs. Olivia was very beautiful. They embarrassed her a little, and Daisy said that it was time for him to go. The father was in complete despair when he saw his beautiful daughter. Father said that Olivia looks absolutely beautiful today. The girl noticed that she was just like her dad and offered her hand to her father. After that, they did not come down, and her father noted that tomorrow was the day she would leave the academy. Olivia said that she would be back quickly, and Oscar and Daisy would also be going with her, so there was no need to worry. While she is in the capital, she is thinking of merging with some other retail shops. Olivia planned to open 10 stores, hoping for their business to be successful. Her father, reading about the market situation, believed the current stores were sufficient even if she opened more. If small stores appear in their area, they're unlikely to be able to get rid of them. But if the stores are medium-sized, they'll either be used or acquired by larger competitors. Olivia and her father knew they would have to work hard in the trade to succeed, and they would have to be prepared for any challenges that might arise. However, they knew that they would only experience true power when they themselves demonstrated it, not when someone else judged their actions. It was a process of self-expression. Her father reminded Olivia that she could always count on his and Kyle's support because they were always there and ready to help in any endeavor, no matter what happened. Olivia, smiling, replied that she completely trusted both of them, and this trust filled her soul as the most important part of her life, which brought her confidence. Olivia was a daddy's girl, and that filled her with pride. Recalling childhood memories, her father saw her again on that threshold, just as he had when she was a little girl. At this time, Count Gerard and Lady Olivia entered the celebration, attracting the attention of everyone present, which was a great event for all the guests of this important evening. The father thanked the guests for their presence at his daughter's 18th birthday celebration and expressed deep gratitude to everyone who shared this moment of joy with them. He wished everyone a good evening, and the festive atmosphere was so lively that all the guests enjoyed the splendor and solemnity of the moment. The defenders of the empire were always close by, standing under the wing of the Red Falcon, who protected the north from all threats, giving everyone confidence in their safety. Olivia became a symbol of this security, and her merits did not go unnoticed, for which she was respected and honored, knowing that she would always stand guard. Afterwards, Olivia mingled with the other ladies, having a good time in the company, maintaining a festive atmosphere, and enjoying the moment. After a while, her father approached Olivia and asked her to dance with him, and this moment became another important milestone in her birthday celebration. Olivia replied, with a smile, that it was a great honor for her to dance with him, and at that moment, she expressed her respect and gratitude by calling him Excellency. Her father, however, disagreed with her words, saying that she should dance the first dance with him, since this moment was important for their relationship. In response to her doubts, her father jokingly said that if she didn't agree, Kyle wouldn't go anywhere tomorrow, although the boy still didn't understand why his father always used this argument. The father noted that if Olivia did not agree, he could have a daughter himself, demonstrating his determination and funny side in such a serious situation. Soon, Daniel approached him and said that he needed to talk to him, which clearly meant an important conversation that should not be postponed. Kyle was stunned to learn that the crown prince himself had arrived for the celebration. Daniel said the prince had ordered that no other nobles be admitted, unless they had permission. Kyle admitted he himself hadn't known about the crown prince's visit, nor had he expected him to show up in person. He hadn't realized this important event was so significant for everyone. At this point, Kyle was simply checking the temple and the hotel he planned to stay at to make sure they were in good condition and ready for guests. Rumor had it that the crown prince had returned to the Wharf Temple the previous evening, adding even more intrigue to his presence at the celebration. Kyle told Daniel that he had an important request for him, which surprised his interlocutor, who then asked what exactly it was. Kyle asked if Daniel would like to go with Olivia to Tamir, as it could be their last chance, and he did not want to miss this opportunity. Daniel, as the representative of his family, stood by Olivia's side, demonstrating his willingness to support her in any circumstances. He was always there to protect her from any external threats. She played a key role in family affairs, serving as both father and son of the Versace family. These roles were necessary given the family's active activities, which continued to thrive abroad. At that moment, Olivia was on the dance floor, enjoying the moment dancing with her brother. It was a momentous occasion for her, one in which she felt free and happy. Olivia told him he was stupid and couldn't dance. However, he defended himself, claiming he was stepping on her toes, and that dancing wasn't his strong suit. She was a true favorite. She received not only love, but also immense respect from everyone who knew her, which could not help but inspire admiration in those around her. His feelings for her began to change the moment she asked him to teach her how to use a sword. That day marked a turning point when she showed interest in something serious. Olivia firmly stated that he must teach her. It was her command, and her determination left no room for doubt. He had to teach her this art. It all began 3 years ago, when Olivia was just 15 years old. It was a moment that became the starting point for their future relationship and interactions. It was hard to miss Mistress Olivia, whom he encountered in the training room. She resembled one of the countesses, but her seriousness and determination left no doubt. Olivia was absolutely serious, and her determination made him feel both uneasy and respectful. This added an additional element of mystery to her image. Daniel said that the lady was doing very well in training, to which Olivia replied that it was all easy, and she was able to cope with any difficulties. Pauline then thought she should start working with increased difficulty to progress faster. Everything needed to be at a higher level. The lady was shocked and told Daniel that she couldn't work at that pace any longer. It was too much for her, and she couldn't continue at the same pace. However, Daniel Gavrilov was confident she could handle it. He insisted she continue, saying she needed to complete 2 more laps, and then everything would be fine. Olivia felt like her lungs were about to explode, but Daniel reassured her that everything was fine. He assured her that her body wouldn't be harmed and that everything would be fine if she continued. Daniel enjoyed the moments when she showed her unexpected side. He especially enjoyed training with her when she acted mature and determined. Olivia never trained for days, but she didn't take shortcuts. She was determined to achieve real results and refused to be persuaded. Daniel approached training with complete seriousness, not relying on luck. For him, training was a true challenge and an important step on the path to success. Because of this, Daniel couldn't afford to give others a chance. He was determined to win, and Olivia was no exception to his training. For him, the inability to fight fairly was a sign of disrespect for the enemy. He was certain the enemy would not spare her because of her age or gender, and this was important to take into account. Olivia suggested trying again. She didn't see anything impossible in it and was ready to continue training despite all the difficulties. From that day on, she ceased to be just a little girl to him. In his eyes, she had already become something more, a true queen worthy of respect. In his eyes, Olivia became a queen, the embodiment of beauty and grace. Even despite her strange dancing, she remained an important figure to him. Olivia didn't like dancing, but she danced so much with this guy that she ended up hurting her feet badly. She didn't expect it to have such consequences. After the dance, Daniel knocked on her door and said he'd like to come in. He noticed she was feeling pain in her legs and offered to help. Olivia let him in, but immediately noticed that her legs were indeed sore. although in fact she didn't enjoy dancing with him. She was just tired. She insisted that everything was fine, and that she didn't need help despite the pain. She just didn't enjoy dancing with him, and that left her feeling frustrated. Daniel offered to get her something to drink, but Olivia declined, saying she'd be fine. She tried to hide her fatigue and not show weakness. She invited him to sit next to her. When he sat down, they simply sat in silence, enjoying the peace. But there was a certain tension in the air. It was a time when they were alone. In a quiet setting, away from everyone, they felt this could be the moment for something more. Olivia felt so good, she couldn't stop rejoicing. She savored this moment, despite everything that had happened before, and couldn't hide her joy. Daniel noticed her joy and asked what was wrong. She quickly replied that nothing special, she was just enjoying good music, not wanting to go into details. Olivia realized that if she got married, it would be the end, so she decided to say everything right away without waiting for a more opportune moment. She reminded Daniel that she was leaving for the academy the next day and hoped that nothing would change between them despite her departure. Daniel didn't know how to respond because the situation was complicated. He didn't know how to react because everything was so vague and without context. Olivia said that because she was leaving, they wouldn't be able to see each other. She asked him not to fall in love with other girls since she wouldn't be around. She promised she'd be back soon. If he waited, everything would work out, and they could continue what they'd started. Olivia hoped to pass her final exam quickly so she could return the following year. She sincerely believed that Daniel would support her decision and not let her down without questioning her plans. Daniel, however, noted that this task would be quite complex and difficult. He understood that she would face many obstacles, and his words left Olivia a little hesitant. Olivia couldn't understand why Daniel was so blunt. She felt his frankness was too harsh and unflattering, putting her in the awkward position of demanding frankness in return. The situation was tense, and Olivia quickly decided to change the subject to avoid any awkwardness. She stood up, hoping her actions wouldn't surprise him, as she was looking for a way to distract herself from the unpleasant conversation. Olivia suggested Daniel go dancing to switch to a lighter topic and avoid discussing unpleasant things. She hoped this would allow them both to relax and avoid further misunderstandings. As soon as Olivia changed the subject, she felt relieved. She was happy to have refocused her attention and headed to the dance floor, with Daniel hoping this moment would brighten the atmosphere. Olivia decided it was time to start dancing. She signaled to the musicians to play a song she thought was perfect for initiating a dance. Daniel recognized the song immediately, though it wasn't often played at aristocratic banquets. He was familiar with it from other occasions, and he remembered how it surprised people when it was played. Although this song was rarely heard in aristocratic circles, it was adored by Northerners. The dance it accompanied, called the courting dance, was popular among the more liberal classes. The essence of this dance was that it didn't matter who the partner was. The important thing was to invite someone who attracted attention. Olivia understood that dancing this dance with someone was a special expression of feeling. The dance was a kind of confession. An invitation to it meant the person was in love. Olivia knew those around her would understand, and that this dance would reveal her true feelings. If Daniel had been sure of her feelings, he probably would have calmly asked her to dance. But apparently, he found it difficult to take a step that was so obvious to her. However, Daniel said it would be better to wait for the next song to dance. He wasn't sure courtship dance was the right choice, and suggested changing it to something more neutral. Olivia was horrified by this answer, as she had been looking forward to this day so much. She couldn't allow him to refuse such a dance, and her disappointment was obvious. Olivia realized she needed to try a different approach. She decided she wouldn't let him get away with this idea and would insist on dancing to this specific song. Olivia said she'd been so eager to dance to this song that she'd be very sad if Lord Daniel refused. She hoped this would persuade him to change his mind. Olivia reminded him that Daniel, as her knight and escort, was obliged to protect her honor, including preventing other young men from approaching her for a dance. That was part of his role. It was hard for her, but Olivia felt there were no other options. She insisted they dance this dance despite his doubts and resistance. This dance was a symbol of her connection with Daniel, and she felt it had to happen now, so Olivia believed it wasn't just an ordinary dance, but an important moment in their relationship. Olivia started to back away, but suddenly felt Daniel grab her hand and tell her she would dance this dance with him. He couldn't let her go so easily. Daniel was confident in his abilities, and despite all his doubts, he mastered the dance perfectly. He knew he could show his best at this moment. Olivia noticed that Daniel had recently been against the dance, which surprised her. She couldn't understand what had made him change his mind so quickly, but she decided not to dwell on it. Daniel admitted he'd always wanted to dance this dance. His words were sincere, and he truly hoped this moment would be special for both of them. Daniel knelt down in front of Olivia like a true knight, and with complete seriousness, asked her to do him the honor of dancing this dance with him, sincerely hoping for her consent. Olivia, being kind and considerate, could not refuse him, and agreed to his request with a smile, accepting this gesture as respect and a sign of attention on his part. They began dancing, and Olivia felt confident, enjoying the moment. She was pleased with herself, and her soul was at peace. For at that moment, dancing became not only physical, but also emotional for her. During the dance, they never took their eyes off each other, their eyes meeting, which enhanced the atmosphere of mutual understanding and trust, without words, but with deep meaning in every movement. He, always reserved and noble, looked different this time. His expression was full of emotions, and it made her heart move, as if it was ready to burst from these new sensations. At that moment, everything around her seemed secondary, and Olivia felt that perhaps she had become much more than just a dance companion for him, that something more important had arisen between them. Everyone around them was watching them, and although Olivia was the center of attention, they understood that if she decided to leave, no one would dare disturb Daniel's peace or violate his wishes. Daniel turned to Olivia and said something quietly, but his words were unintelligible. She couldn't understand what he meant, but she sensed it was something important yet incomplete. Olivia, not understanding his words, asked him again, to which Daniel replied that he had not said anything special, making her feel that perhaps he was hiding something, but she did not insist on it. At that moment, Olivia felt a slight twinge of embarrassment. Kyle, noticing her reaction, turned to her father, with interest, asking if he'd noticed her smiling like a child, which made her heart beat faster. The father replied that he had seen her smile too, but had not attached much importance to it, saying that it was ordinary joy, and that her eyes spoke more than the moment of dance itself, creating an atmosphere of warmth and closeness. It was a dance of respect, and Olivia was glad it was being enjoyed so much. But Daniel, still somewhat surprised by what was happening, asked if this was what he thought it should be. The lady thought that Daniel was most likely related to the Meridian family, and perhaps his participation in the dance was not accidental, since his origin determined many moments in this society. Countess Halkin, a prominent figure in Northern high society, watched the dance closely and remarked that she had not known Daniel had such talent. His ability to dance so exquisitely surprised her, as if he had been hiding his skills. Baroness Vermonchild, a close friend of Daniel's mother, commented that the hearts of young ladies would not be able to bear it, as such a dance is capable of charming and captivating the heart of everyone in its presence. The other woman thought Lord Daniel was an unfeeling man, but his gaze was so intense and full of pain that she suspected him of having feelings for Lady Olivia. The Countess, watching him, began to consider that it was entirely possible his feelings for Olivia were genuine. If anyone could fall in love with a woman like her, then it was entirely justified. However, despite any possible feelings, Lady Olivia was the daughter of a count, which placed Lord Daniel in a lower position. The Meridian family did not enjoy the same high status as hers. Among the 10 most renowned swordsmiths in the kingdom, 2 were from their family, and Daniel's father, himself, was also a master. This gave his family a certain respect, but still less than the Countess's family. Lord Daniel would not refuse an alliance with the Versace family, as it would significantly raise their social status, and they could improve their position in the kingdom. Despite all the circumstances, he was forgiven for much, because of his appearance and inner qualities. He was a good person, which also played a significant role in those around him. These two, Daniel and Olivia, really suited each other, and after some time, Daniel wondered where Mrs. Olivia had disappeared, to not noticing her among the guests. He soon caught Olivia's eye, standing with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked at him, and their eyes met immediately, capturing his attention. Coming closer to her, he asked if she had drunk all the wine in her glass. He looked concerned, wanting to make sure she was okay. Olivia replied with a smile that she had only had a little to drink, just one glass, and that it couldn't possibly be making her drunk. She assured him that everything was fine, and she didn't feel drunk. Kyle, who was nearby, said Olivia had clearly drunk more than she was admitting. Other guests also noticed her behavior and began to express their doubts. Kyle insisted she was clearly drunk, and her condition reminded him of Daisy's situation. This remark made Olivia feel uneasy. Daniel apologized, explaining that she'd merely had a glass of champagne, and he couldn't interfere with her choice. He felt a little guilty about what had happened. Daniel's father, noticing his anxiety, said that nothing serious had happened, but asked that Olivia be taken to a room to avoid the attention of other guests before the situation escalated. Kyle insisted that Daniel take her away immediately before she did anything inappropriate or got out of control. He didn't want her condition to become a talking point. Olivia objected, saying she didn't want to leave. She reminded him that her life would change tomorrow and she wouldn't see certain people anymore. She even got into a little fight with her brother. Meanwhile, Kyle wondered where Daisy had disappeared to. She hadn't been seen among the guests for a long time. He couldn't figure out where she had gone or what had happened to her. Meanwhile, Daisy stood by the fountain, pensively contemplating the water. Her thoughts were far away, and she didn't notice anyone was watching her. As the gentleman approached, Daisy turned to see Kyle standing before her. He came close, and their eyes met, as if they both expected something from this encounter. Kyle, with interest in his voice, remarked that he'd heard about her trip to Timir. Daisy confirmed this, explaining that she was going there to open La Debon stores in the city. Kyle asked if he should come too. Daisy noticed he was clearly worried about Miss Olivia, which left her with a certain question about his feelings. Kyle noticed that it wasn't quite what Daisy thought. He was worried about her future, and her well-being. His concern for Mrs. Daisy went beyond mere friendship. Kyle began to think he would miss Mistress Daisy when they were apart. He realized how attached he had become to her, and how difficult it would be without her. Daisy didn't understand why Kyle was so worried and talking about being bored. She couldn't understand why those words had such meaning or what they really meant to him. Kyle noted that men tended to be flighty, especially in the places he frequented. The lady, however, didn't understand why Kyle was so interested in her relationships with men from Tamir. Daisy no longer wanted to be afraid and shake with fear. She decided that she would now be more confident and ask directly what interested her, without hiding her feelings. Suddenly, Kyle asked Daisy if she remembered drinking alcohol with her 4 years ago. He wanted her to recall what happened and what she said. Daisy couldn't understand why Kyle had asked, that he simply wanted her to remember what had happened that day and what exactly she had said. That was what interested him. Daisy shouted that she wasn't the kind of girl who couldn't remember anything after drinking. Kyle, in turn, declared that he had decided to go to Tamir next year. The lady asked him what exactly he meant. Kyle clarified that he would contact her when he reached the city. He didn't want her to worry, but that would come later. Daisy asked him to wait. But if something shocked him again, if the situation became too difficult, he would risk his life. She didn't want him to die. Daisy was starting to worry again. Her emotions were overwhelmed. She was expecting something important. Something that would change everything, but she couldn't figure out what it was. When he spoke like that, Daisy began to feel at a loss, unsure of what to do or how to proceed. Everything became too confusing, and she didn't know how to respond. 4 years ago, a banquet was held at the Versace Castle to celebrate the New Year and the return of the troops. It was a momentous occasion, unforgettable for everyone. At that banquet, Madame Rivière received flowers from her fiancé. His every action was accompanied by declarations of love. His feelings were sincere, despite the difficulties. The flowers were beautiful, and Daisy heard someone say that Kyle had come to the banquet. This caught her attention, as his presence was special. The thought that Kyle was about to confess his feelings to Miss Janet flashed through the conversation. It became a topic of discussion among those present, attracting everyone's attentions. Kyle's face flushed when he was spotted with Janet. The two looked like they were truly compatible, and it was obvious to everyone around them. They also discussed how Miss Daisy had once received flowers from her fiancé as a child. That had been a long time ago, and now the memories evoked nostalgic feelings in everyone. Daisy replied that as a child it was just a joke to her. She didn't take flowers seriously, as they didn't have the significance they might have now. Now, after so much time had passed, she realized that moment had been important, but she no longer remembered the details. Childhood was gone, but the memories remained. Kyle ran to Daniel and screamed that they were in trouble. Something had happened with Daisy and the alcohol, and he didn't know how to handle the situation. Daisy had become very drunk, and Daniel, concerned about her condition, asked Kyle if he realized what he had done. The situation was clearly getting out of control. Daniel reminded Kyle that he knew Daisy wasn't a good alcoholic, and that it was his responsibility to monitor her condition. Kyle, however, insisted that he hadn't given her anything to drink and didn't deserve any blame. Daniel wasted no time in asking who had gotten Daisy drunk. Kyle replied that he didn't know who had done it, but had barely dragged her there and put her to bed, unable to ask. At that moment, Daniel mentioned that he'd heard Kyle intend to confess. Today, Kyle was shocked by the news and asked if that really counted as a confession. In response, Daniel declared that Kyle would find the drunk girl and do everything right. It sounded almost like a threat, and Kyle didn't know how to react to such assurance. The gentleman remarked that they should be quieter. Otherwise, if Daisy woke up, everyone would be in an unpleasant situation, and no one would want to take the blame for her condition. When Daisy started to mention confession, Kyle was relieved she was coming to. He was glad she was conscious again, and that their conversation could perhaps continue. But Daisy screamed in horror that Kyle shouldn't even think about confessing. She didn't want him to make any moves on her, especially such a serious one. She declared that he shouldn't spend money on her, let alone give her flowers. It was a categorical demand, and she clearly had no regard for his feelings. Kyle tried to remind her that they had already agreed on a future and decided to get married. But Daisy only shook her head, not believing he was serious. The girl burst into tears and admitted that she didn't want this, that he was a real idiot, and that his whole behavior irritated her. The tears flowed, but the words brought no relief. Kyle, seeing her tears, said that if she didn't want it, then they really weren't getting married. He agreed with her decision and wanted to console her. He gently wiped away her tears and quietly told her that it was his fault and that she shouldn't cry over his actions. He regretted how things had turned out between them. Daniel approached Kyle and reminded him that he'd said he'd done nothing wrong. He'd just come here. It seemed he hadn't intended to become part of this conflict. Daisy grabbed Kyle's arm, and he immediately fell silent. She was putting pressure on him again, not giving him any room to back out of his words and actions. The girl pulled Kyle toward her and suddenly kissed him full on the lips. It was an unexpected but decisive gesture that signaled her dominance in the relationship. She declared that he would now belong to her, and as soon as he turned 20, they would marry immediately. She was confident in her decision, paying no attention to his reaction. Kyle was shocked by what was happening, and Daisy added with a serious expression that if he met another girl, she would kill him. It was a strange but decisive warning. Daniel, approaching Kyle, told him he was a real idiot for not resisting and standing still. He couldn't understand how Kyle could allow himself to be so passive. Kyle replied with a smile that Daisy had kissed him and proposed marriage. He seemed a little taken aback, but couldn't hide his slight joy at the unusual situation. He admitted he couldn't get away from the topic, but today he was happy, even though he was alone. Everything that was happening seemed strange, but at that moment he felt good being who he was. Daisy was drunk and couldn't remember anything. The banquet ended, and the day had come to leave for the academy. A warp link had been opened for her from the temple to the capital of Tamir. 3 people were scheduled to arrive in Tamir: Olivia, Daisy, and Oscar. Daniel announced he would accompany them on the trip. He decided to go with them, despite the other participants' plans. His decision was unexpected, but he was certain it was the right one. He believed the girl must have understood what had happened the previous night, and that he would be there. This was because the situation required additional support from him. The lady was surprised by his words and began to recall the events. She remembered everything up until the moment they began dancing, but she couldn't understand why Daniel had decided to join them. The girl then expressed her point of view, stating that none of this mattered, and asked why Daniel had decided to go with them to Tamir if it was not part of her plans. He was the one who should have accompanied Miss Olivia from the very beginning. However, If she were to live at the academy, the need for his presence and protection would disappear. Daniel had probably explained all this to her the day before, and she couldn't understand why she had done it. She was ashamed of her behavior and felt terrible about it. Daniel had correctly guessed that she disliked his presence in their company, and it was noticeable he understood her feelings, though he couldn't quite share them. However, the lady hastened to assure him that he was mistaken and that everything was not as he thought. She saw no problem with his going, but she still doubted the necessity of his participation. It wasn't because the knight wouldn't be there, but rather because it was simply a waste of manpower. She believed it would be better if he focused on more important duties. She explained that there was no point in wasting a knight who would normally be confined to his residence and only come out on weekends. He still had to work, and that was what mattered. She asked what could be better than being a knight of the Red Falcon Academy. Daniel replied that perhaps staying where he was would be best for everyone. The lady agreed with his assumption, adding that it looked like he had just chuckled. She noticed it, but didn't dwell on his reaction. She then asked if he'd been fired by accident. If so, she was prepared to deal with it. The man explained that he'd made the decision to leave his position himself. In the temple of the sacred land of Hershey Milo, Ulshkamerger of the Sun Palace greeted Olivia, daughter of the first Empress Cecilia. He was respectful, but his gaze was slightly wary. The lady asked him to raise his head and accompany them. It was a gesture that emphasized her confidence and calm in the situation. He immediately complied with her request. The scene she witnessed reminded her of the events described in the novel. It was the scene where the emperor's actions were explained as a way to prevent all the misfortunes threatening Olivia. Milo's address to them and his mention of Argon's middle name caught her attention. The name had always been associated with the imperial family, and she sensed its significance. The name Argon can now only be used by members of the imperial family or those officially recognized by them. It was an important element emphasizing their status and belonging. When Alfred the Emperor's first father was still crown prince, he planned to marry the daughter of Emperor Argon, but it soon became clear that Cecilia Olivia's mother was pregnant. However, just a week before the wedding, Argon collapsed, and the crown prince was forced to marry another girl from an aristocratic family, which came as a surprise to everyone. The Dakharan imperial family granted Argon's daughter the status of concubine of the crown prince. This led to the birth of Cecilia, who became the imperial daughter. Her origins were linked to high aristocracy. That part of history was grand and filled with momentous events, unlike the current moment, which seemed much more mundane and insignificant. Her life no longer had the significance it once had. Olivia had to tell this story to justify her actions and gain forgiveness. Her actions could have been considered criminal, and she hoped for vindication. However, her fate, according to the author, was sealed by death. The main character had no intention of allowing the crown prince to remain untouched and continue to accumulate influence. She didn't want his wealth or reputation to remain untouched. She felt tired and didn't understand why she had to justify herself. In her eyes, both the emperor and the crown prince were people who couldn't be trusted despite their high positions. The imperial palace of Dakharan, or the Sun Palace, was so named because of the enormous sums invested in its construction. This place was a symbol of the empire's luxury and grandeur. Olivia was stunned when she first saw the palace. The grandeur and scope of the place was overwhelming. The Sun Palace was truly as grand as expected. The man announced that only Lord Meridian and Milady Versace could proceed. These two were invited guests and were permitted to proceed under imperial orders. He also added that His Majesty the Emperor was awaiting their arrival. These words were significant as they emphasized that their visit was official and important to the court. The moment had finally arrived for the final leg of their journey. Olivia, arriving from the outlying duchy of Versace, felt the warmth and bright sun of the Dakharan Empire. Daniel Baron Meridian also greeted the emperor, sensing the atmosphere of the Solar Empire. The place clearly had its own special influence on all who visited it. Olivia realized that he truly was the emperor. His presence was majestic, and he offered to dispense with formalities, inviting them to come and sit. The emperor noticed Olivia's good manners, and this immediately caught his attention. He couldn't help but wonder where she acquired them, as such qualities are rare. Olivia explained that her nanny was Baroness Meridian, a woman who devoted much attention to raising and educating her. It was she who instilled in the girl the basics of good manners and cultured behavior. The emperor also noted that her involvement in the swordsmanship department was likely due to Gianna's influence. Olivia felt a slight twinge of unease, realizing that her knowledge came from a Sioux she had never even met, but she understood. The emperor, noticing that Olivia now looked healthy, mentioned that he had heard about her ailments. However, now she seemed more confident and mature, unlike the girl she had been before. Olivia apologized for disturbing him, but added that she felt much better. As she clutched the sword to her chest, it became clear to her that the knight's path was her choice and her destiny. The emperor was surprised to learn that the crown prince still disapproved of her decision. He had thought Daniel had been the one who had trained her in swordsmanship, but it turned out otherwise. Daniel confirmed that he was the one who had trained Olivia, after which the emperor turned to him, noting that he was very similar to Lord Meridian, both in manners and in appearance. The Imperial Guard also needed talents like Daniel's, so he asked if he had considered joining their ranks to use his skills for the good of the Empire. The emperor explained that he was worried about how Olivia would live alone and suggested that Daniel consider joining the Guard to ensure her safety. Daniel replied that if the offer remained valid, he would be glad to remain in the Imperial Guard, especially since it would give him the opportunity to serve a great cause. The emperor asked Daniel what he meant by remain, as this could mean that he could always leave the Guard if he wished. Daniel thanked the emperor for the offer, but added that he had sworn an oath of allegiance to the Versace family and could not break it even for the sake of serving in the Guard. The emperor tried to convince Daniel that his master would never allow him to swear allegiance to another place, even temporarily, and that such oaths could not be easily changed. Daniel replied that his master had a big heart and said that if he needed to find work in the capital, he should take advantage of this opportunity. Olivia was a little puzzled, unsure why Daniel was saying this, while looking at her. The emperor had also noticed their relationship and could easily see that there was something between them. She was happy, and it was obvious the emperor smiled, observing her reaction, and couldn't help but chuckle. The emperor found Daniel's words about wasting labor amusing, but at the same time he knew it was true. Olivia truly was Daniel's mistress, and that was obvious. The emperor agreed that talented men should rest and use their powers wisely, so Daniel could remain in the Guard if he wanted to. He added that even if Daniel only stayed for the time being, while Miss was in the capital, he could begin serving in the Imperial Guard from tomorrow. Then the emperor turned to Olivia and asked if she was all right, and if she was feeling any ailments, as he was worried about her health. Olivia replied that they would be greatly honored if His Majesty would care for talented people like her. She was grateful for the emperor's concern. Olivia thought the emperor resembled the Frog Prince, and frankly, she was glad that she was not involved in the Crown Prince's affairs, preferring to observe what was happening from the sidelines. The Crown Prince is his father's son, and she knows his temperament. It was a pleasant time. The emperor met his niece and acquired a distinguished knight. He hopes they will come again. Olivia remarked that he could invite them any time he wanted, and they would be happy to accept. However, she knew that wasn't entirely true, and she kept her true thoughts to herself, not daring to voice them. In fact, she hadn't intended to come and didn't want him to invite her. Her true reluctance remained hidden as she couldn't find the courage to say it out loud, which evoked a slight regret. Apparently, their visit took up too much of the emperor's time, and he likely decided against inviting them again. Perhaps he realized that such meetings should not be repeated too often. The emperor even refused to arrange transportation for them from the palace to the residence, leaving them without an escort. They eventually boarded a carriage, kindly sent by Oscar, to continue their journey. Daisy, worried, asked if anything unusual had happened. The lady calmly replied that nothing unusual had happened, although her voice sounded a little tense than usual. The maid was perplexed by her mistress's despondency. Finally, Olivia couldn't bear it any longer, and cried out sharply that something was constantly tearing her apart inside, as if her soul could find no peace. The cause of her displeasure was interference in the Crown Prince's affairs. She was outraged that someone had dared to suggest that a Versace knight become a scout, something Olivia considered unacceptable. Despite this, she decided not to share her thoughts with Daisy, But the maid concluded that her mistress had likely been unable to speak frankly about this to the emperor, which added to the heaviness in her heart. Olivia, trying to remain calm, remarked that she no longer cared. However, she mentioned that the real problem was Daniel, who had suddenly decided to join the Imperial Guard starting the following day. Upon learning of this, Daisy was furious and declared it absolutely unacceptable. She believed Daniel completely misunderstood his position as Meridian's heir, and that such decisions could have serious consequences. Daisy was sure that if he found out about this, he would immediately head for the state border. Her indignation grew because she could not allow such carelessness. The maid, despite her kindness to everyone, showed genuine displeasure. Her indignation was loud, as she made no secret of her disappointment at what was happening. Daniel tried to explain that his service in the Imperial Guard was temporary. He wanted Lady Olivia not to worry, as it was only related to her stay here. He assured her that despite any difficulties, he would cope. For him, Knight Daisy's confidence and support were far more important than any imperial decree, and he had no intention of letting her or anyone else down. That's why he promised to do everything he could to avoid making a single mistake. After these words, he turned to Olivia, trying to understand her attitude toward her service. Daniel emphasized that his temporary assignment to the guard likely didn't cause Olivia any inconvenience. His words were calm, yet they hinted at a hidden hope for her understanding. The lady remarked that everything was fine. He was a good boy. She had deliberately pretended that she didn't like it. It seemed to her that he was asking her about it. Daniel landed his new job thanks to Olivia's support. Her advice and help were crucial, so upon receiving his first salary, he felt it was his duty to thank her with a gift. Smiling, Daniel asked Olivia what she'd like. However, his sister Daisy, clearly displeased, nudged her brother and remarked that such questions weren't appropriate. The gift was supposed to be a surprise. Daisy advised him to choose a gift himself, which she assured him would reflect his feelings for Olivia. Daniel paused. He'd never encountered such a situation before and didn't know how to do it right. Olivia, having learned of Daniel's plans, reassured him. She assured him that it didn't matter what he chose, because everything he had would be precious to her. She added that she would always take care of him, no matter the circumstances. That day, the three of them, Olivia, Daniel, and Daisy, talked for a long time. They shared thoughts and laughed, enjoying rare moments of togetherness. It was the first time in a long time that they had spent time together in such harmony. Olivia remembered how they used to spend time like this often, especially when Daniel accompanied her. Until last summer, these were their small but precious rituals, which she always remembered fondly. Though much had changed since then, some things remained the same. She believed that even time spent in darkness or hardship could become bright if you cherished the moments that brought joy. Mrs. Olivia arrived at the Versace residence. The house had been a gift to Alfredo from Empress Cecilia upon their wedding. Its grandeur and beauty left a strong impression on those who saw it for the first time. The emperor's special relationship with Cecilia made the residence unique. A vast garden brimming with flowers and a luxurious house reminiscent of an imperial palace. This place reflected not only power, but also love. The emperor brought his wife here for their honeymoon, intending to return often. However, Cecilia followed the count to Hershey's territory, and now this place harbors memories of the past. When Olivia arrived, the servants, including Fred, who had been chamberlain to the first empress, greeted her joyfully. They were eager to serve her again and were eager to show their respect. Olivia asked Fred for his help and concern. She introduced Daniel, who would now serve in the Imperial Guard, and Daisy Le Debon's superior. It was a special occasion for everyone. The servants took the opportunity to serve their mistress again, with great pride. Rose, Fred's wife, stood out in particular. She had once been Empress Cecilia's personal maid and remained devoted to her family. Rose greeted Olivia warmly, calling it an honor. She fondly recalled her time serving the Empress and was delighted to meet her mistress again, promising her care and loyalty. Rose and Fred's story left a deep mark. They remained loyal to Olivia until the very end, protecting her. Their devotion became an example of true service and genuine affection. Olivia again asked the servants to take care of her. Daisy, overjoyed, rushed to hug them, showing how much she missed them. It was a touching and sincere moment of reunion. Rose was thrilled to hear of Olivia's arrival. She also missed Fred and looked forward to this day, so she could once again feel the warmth of family and service. Daniel knew Olivia's time at the academy had been difficult. Living there for 3 years, she felt at home thanks to the care of Rose and Fred, who were like parents to her, helping and supporting her. Now, Daisy, looking like an ordinary 12-year-old girl, brightened the atmosphere. Her spontaneity and cheerfulness confused Olivia, who even blushed slightly. Rose, noticing this, suggested they all go into the house, where food had already been prepared. She wanted the mistress to feel comfortable and able to rest after the journey. Olivia invited everyone, and Daniel, noticing her flushed face, asked worriedly if she was okay. He was worried about her well-being and didn't want to remain indifferent. Olivia, smiling, assured him she felt fine. She wanted him to smile because his smile meant the most to her. It brought her joy and peace. However, there was a note of anxiety in her words. She mentioned that such moments of calm could be short-lived, as dark clouds seemed to begin to gather over them. The traditions that the empire passed down from generation to generation over several centuries were of such grandiose scale that many believed that this was due to the academy. The second head of the Versace family insisted that all aristocrats were required to attend the academy. This was initially conceived as a way to strengthen imperial power and exert influence over the northern regions. However, if we look at this process from a broader perspective, we can see that the empire constantly attracted young and talented professionals who then contributed to the development of the country. Aristocrats who received a high-quality education were actively involved in political activities, occupying important positions, and influencing processes in the state, which contributed to the country's progress. In a country where education is an important and powerful tool, like a strong reed, people can live long and happily overcoming difficulties. This knowledge helps them survive and thrive in any environment. From this perspective, the academy certainly deserved praise. It served as the foundation upon which the empire's future was built, producing high-quality specialists and leaders. Olivia, however, couldn't understand why she felt so sad despite everything that was happening. There was a vague melancholy in her soul that she couldn't explain despite all her determination. Olivia greeted Rora and asked how she slept. It was her first conversation with the girl, and she felt a little awkward, but she tried to be polite and friendly. Rora was shocked to learn that the lady knew her name, Olivia. In turn, noted that she remembers many people, as it's important to remember those close to you, even if it's just a casual acquaintance. Olivia was assigned servants at the castle to attend to her. Among them was Rora, a young girl whom Daisy cared for, devoting special attention and care to her throughout her time. At Smackhall Academy, all students in the dormitory wore uniforms based on their department. However, the Department of Magic was an exception, as its students were required to wear only white uniforms. The remaining departments wore a deep blue uniform with various details such as waistcoats, buttons, and other elements that distinguished them from each other, symbolizing their affiliation with one or another faculty. Olivia, who was planning to study ball handling, was required to wear a silver uniform. Her department had 2 uniforms each for different occasions and events. One uniform was intended for school events and classes within the academy, while the other was more casual, designed for training so as not to restrict movement and ensure comfort during the learning process. The aristocrats didn't receive their uniforms directly from the school, but purchased them from a tailor. This gave them the opportunity to try on and choose what truly suited them, as all the suits were created by the renowned designer Villainess. Rora, delighted with Olivia's new uniform, said it fit perfectly and suited her mistress perfectly. Olivia thanked her for the compliment, smiling and feeling comfortable in this place. Violetta, the maid who shared Olivia's room, suddenly asked if she could clean the room. This surprised her mistress, as she hadn't expected anyone to be so attentive to her privacy. Violetta was the maid Olivia shared a room with, and last night she'd asked her if she could clean. Olivia was surprised by the question, but replied that it wasn't necessary as long as the room was in order. Each department head at the academy, as well as their deputies, receives single rooms. Olivia, who enrolled without taking entrance exams, was assigned a double room, a rarity. If the mistress had any preferences regarding the room's style or any furniture needs, she was supposed to let her know. Olivia thought the room should be decorated to make it more cozy and pleasant to live in. Olivia said she didn't care, so she asked me to tell her that they could decorate the room however they wanted, and she also asked to ask Oscar to order a sleeper sofa bed and table similar to the ones she used in the Versace castle. And she can also go and choose a table, a wardrobe, and a bed for herself. She can leave until the evening, because now she is her faithful servant here. This is a bribe so that she treats her well. Rora was very grateful to the lady, Olivia, in turn told her not to buy things that were too cheap. As a woman with a high sense of self-worth, what was important to her was what she used in her everyday life. One could say this is provided as social assistance for workers who toil for the benefit of their masters. This gesture is intended to make their lives easier and help with important everyday matters. Rora really did look after my lady, while always supporting her when needed. She could go shopping with Oscar, as he'd been working a lot lately, which had been causing him considerable stress. Rora wished her mistress a safe journey and said goodbye. She couldn't help but express her gratitude and concern, for Olivia was not only her mistress, but also an important person in her life. Olivia's first order of business was to stop by the swordsmanship department. It was an important visit she couldn't postpone. She understood that time was a precious resource that needed to be managed wisely. Olivia was thrilled to have a map that allowed her to easily locate the address she needed. It relieved her of unnecessary worry, allowing her to move calmly in the right direction without wasting time searching. However, when Olivia approached the department's hallway, she noticed it was completely empty. This surprised her, as it was usually crowded. It was unclear why there was no one there this time. Olivia couldn't figure out the reason. Perhaps the department staff were just getting ready to begin their work. After all, it takes time for everything to be ready, and perhaps they weren't planning to start classes until dawn. At that moment, Olivia noticed that the department's uniform resembled her own. This gave her confidence, as she felt a sense of belonging here. Despite all the uncertainty and silence around her, time was still on her side and she could wait. But Olivia couldn't understand why everyone was in such a hurry. Why was everyone running? That was the real question that was nagging at her at that moment. Olivia approached the 5th Street in Tamir, where the office of La Depoche's boss was located. This was an important stop on her route, and she knew exactly what she needed to do next. Everything was organized according to plan. Oscar asked if Olivia had really said she'd go shopping with him. She confirmed that she had, but added that if he was busy, she'd go alone so as not to waste his time. Oscar disagreed and declared that it wouldn't happen. He was determined and had no intention of letting Olivia go shopping alone. He wanted to be with her so they could work things out together. Oscar continued that Olivia had told him to choose whichever items he wanted, meaning he was already packed and ready to go. He had no intention of waiting. On the contrary, he wanted to set out to find the things he needed as soon as possible. Rora noted that this was true, but then she noticed that Oscar was busy. He quickly asked her not to upset him further. He was clearly agitated, which only increased his desire to act as quickly as possible. Olivia was absolutely horrified when she heard Oscar say she had upset him. She hadn't meant to upset him, and this statement truly shocked her. She couldn't imagine how she could disappoint him. Oscar said that was indeed true, adding that his favorite pastime was spending money, especially other people's money. He spoke with such enthusiasm that Olivia realized how much he enjoyed the process. The girl was shocked, unable to believe her ears, but Oscar assured her that everything would be fine. He believed it was a great way to relieve pent-up stress and free himself from all the worries that had been weighing heavily on his shoulders. Olivia was delighted to hear these words and agreed with Oscar. She decided to enjoy the shopping experience and not worry about all the difficulties that might arise in the future. After hours of shopping, Oscar finally asked Olivia if she needed anything else. She replied that she'd already bought everything and there were no more items left on her list. Then he decided to take action. Oscar suggested that if nothing else was needed, they should buy something for Daisy too. It was a logical step, and Olivia supported his suggestion. Understanding the importance of not forgetting loved ones, he asked that everything be sent to the Versace residence and that the remainder be sent to Daisy Meridian's house. Oscar knew they had specific plans, and this decision was dictated by business necessity. They had a bed that had previously been used by the Daisy family at the Versace Palace. Oscar decided it should also be sent to the residence so that everything would be in its place and not overlooked. Rora asked Mr. Oscar to slow down a bit. She was worried that if they continued at the same pace, their expenses would increase significantly, and she might be fired for overspending. Rora tried to convey to him the importance of saving, fearing the consequences for her work. She understood that if they weren't careful with their money, she wouldn't escape punishment. She explained that unnecessary spending should be avoided. If Olivia found out about excessive spending, it would lead to unpleasant consequences for everyone, including herself. Oscar assured Rora there was nothing to worry about. Everything was under control, and she shouldn't worry. He insisted the situation wasn't as dire as she thought. He recalled that Ms. Olivia values people who manage their money wisely. It's important to her that funds are used effectively, avoiding unnecessary waste. Oscar added that it was his own money earned together with Mrs. Daisy, so there was no need to worry. The important thing was to enjoy life and spend wisely without unnecessary worries. Rora understood Oscar's point. If you earn a lot, you can spend it. He continued shopping, ignoring her pleas. He was confident in his actions. At that moment, a young man passing by the academy noticed that Arnold was once again in charge of disciplining the newcomers. He wasn't thrilled considering the event a waste of time. The guy expressed his dissatisfaction, saying he was tired of these pointless workouts. He didn't understand the point, since for beginners, it didn't produce any real results anyway. He also asked Arnold if he knew the last time a Versace daughter had come to the academy as a recruit. Arnold paused, not having known this before. Arnold slowed slightly and asked when exactly it had happened. He hadn't known anyone from the Versace family had become a recruit, and it surprised him a little. The boy also reported that the sister of Mr. Kyle, whom he had praised so much, was now studying in the swordsmanship department. This news caught Arnold's attention. Arnold was overjoyed by this news. Now he would have the chance to witness the swordsmanship that Master Kyle had so boasted about. He had been looking forward to it. Arnold was certain that Master Kyle cared deeply for his younger sister. This was a well-known fact in the Empire, and everyone understood that he had trained her in this skill himself. He even imagined Mr. Kyle personally training his sister, as her safety and development were his top priorities. This strengthened his confidence in her talent. Arnold couldn't believe such a precious sister could be entrusted to anyone else. He didn't understand why the thought made him feel so tense. Meanwhile, his friend, noticing Arnold's deep thought, said he was going to move on. Arnold, meanwhile, continued to think about the Versace family's daughter and her role at the academy. The thought of Master Kyle's swordsman's younger sister never left him. It filled him with joy and excitement, as he was curious to find out what kind of person she really was. While Arnold continued to ponder, Mistress Olivia was still late. Her delay didn't bother him, but he couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Kyle's sister. The Smack Hall Academy, the square in front of the Arts Department building, where swordsmanship classes take place, looked majestic. Directly in front of it was a large square where students gathered for training. Arnold knew they'd arrived just 13 minutes before class started, and wondered if they understood all the reasons why they had to be there so early. It was important for discipline. Anyone who arrived late was required to assume a prone position, which was the punishment for late arrival. This rule allowed no exceptions, and it served a purpose: to train discipline and endurance. These were basic exercises that, despite their simplicity, were considered essential for training. All students were required to master them before proceeding to more complex swordsmanship and martial arts training. Olivia watched the proceedings with surprise and no small amount of shock. Even though they were only freshmen, such strict demands seemed too harsh to her. She hated physical exercise, especially anything that put strain on her body. Even if a student arrived early, they had to stand there and wait, and if someone was late, they couldn't avoid punishment. The push-up position was mandatory. There was no way around this rule. Suddenly, someone approached Olivia and greeted her, but it wasn't what she expected. It turned out the guy was sitting in the tree behind her and decided to talk. It was strange, but also interesting. He introduced himself as Ray Olivia, a little taken aback, replied that her name was Olivia. It was a brief and polite introduction, though she wasn't sure she should continue the conversation with this man. Wasting no time, Ray jumped down from the tree and smiling asked if he really was handsome. Olivia was stunned. She hadn't expected anyone to ask such questions at such a level. Olivia, slightly taken aback, thought such stupid questions were a thing of the past. She didn't know how to react to his directness and slight impudence. He didn't lose his composure and continued asking if he was handsome enough for Olivia to want to marry him. This was even more unexpected, and the girl simply didn't know how to respond to such a proposal. Olivia replied that everyone has their own tastes, and she had her own preferences, so she politely declined, stating that she didn't see Ray as a potential partner. It was her honest answer. Ray, without taking offense, began to inquire about Olivia's thoughts on him. He wanted to know more about her opinion, but he wasn't sure she'd give him a candid answer. Olivia paused for a moment, assessing Ray's appearance. His round blue eyes, lilac hair, and porcelain skin were truly captivating. However, that wasn't what changed her mind. Ray's looks were on par with those of the boys who had recently graduated from Manhattan Academy. He was quite handsome, but oddly enough, Olivia didn't show much interest in him. Despite this, Olivia decided to be frank and said she already had someone she considered her future husband. It was that same Daniel, and she couldn't just forget him. She knew she couldn't abandon Daniel so easily because her feelings for him were genuine. Falling in love with someone else was impossible, and she had no intention of betraying her principles. Ray couldn't understand why all the other students were crawling along, unaware of the importance of speed. He believed they needed to move faster to make it to all their classes and practices. Olivia decided it was time for a jog. Her goal was to blend in discreetly with the other students so as not to stand out or draw attention to her slow pace. Olivia decided to ask Ray how good his magical abilities were. He happily confirmed that he did indeed possess the power, which gave him confidence in his abilities. Olivia suggested to Ray that she move to the middle of the newcomers group so she could run with them. It was her decision, and she hoped it would help her adapt to the training process more quickly. Ray replied that if she wanted, he would be happy to fulfill her request. He was ready to help, and his confidence in his abilities left no doubt that he could fulfill Olivia's request. The girl closed her eyes slightly, and at that moment, it became clear to her that she was indeed in the middle of a crowd. She felt her displacement was irreversible, but this didn't cause her to panic. She realized she could now run calmly alongside the newcomers without any unnecessary awkwardness. There was no sign of trouble, and no one seemed to notice her presence in the group. However, Arnold said they'd missed one lap and had to keep running. Everyone had to do it again, even though they were starting to feel tired. There was only one more lap left, and then they would continue training. The girl could still feel the red head affecting her, causing discomfort and tension that couldn't be ignored. Despite all this, she felt grateful that the run had ended, thanks to Ray. It was a relief, and now she had to take a moment to thank him for his help. Ray said she'd been acting foolishly, even more so than he'd imagined, thinking she'd long since gotten over him. He was surprised by her actions and the way she handled the situation. She remained as beautiful as ever, and her audacity never escaped his notice. Ray always admired her confidence and self-assurance, which only added to her appeal. Olivia said that if a person wants to know if he has met someone with whom he can be happy, then it is enough to simply feel how his heart beats faster, and he can hardly breathe. If someone meets such a person, their heart will tell them to marry them without hesitation. Olivia believed that such feelings cannot be ignored. At the moment, everything was going exactly as she described. It seemed as if she were that very person, but why she didn't have the same feeling, she couldn't understand. Arnold assumed the newbies were tired, but in reality, they hadn't accomplished anything serious yet. The training session had only just begun, and there was still a lot of work to do before it was over. She felt the heat rushing down on her, the smells of the place were becoming more and more unpleasant. And on top of that, her stomach was clenching with a hunger pain demanding attention and food. One of the guys declared that if they weren't going to behave honorably and be true fighters, they should go back. There was no room for the weak and the indecisive here. He offered them the opportunity to challenge him if they believed they could defeat him. He was ready to meet anyone willing to test their strength against him. If no one among the newcomers was willing to fight, he would choose the one to continue. He was certain none of them would dare, but he was prepared to act. He spotted a pink-haired girl and called her forward. He asked her to draw her sword, preparing for further action, not doubting her ability to handle the task. Olivia remembered this girl as she was one of the last remaining in the training process. Despite her fatigue, she didn't give up and continued fighting until the very end. However, her stance and swordsmanship left much to be desired. This was obvious, and it wasn't hard to imagine her patience wouldn't last long at this pace. It wouldn't be surprising if the girl soon felt leg cramps from fatigue. Olivia hoped she was okay, and had already heard requests to replace her with a more trained fighter. Many people came to practice in Olivia's place. Albert noticed that among them were many principled and determined individuals who wanted to save the princess. The Pink Princess appeared with the intention of learning swordsmanship, although some believed she was simply there for the taking and had no interest in actual training. Olivia, in turn, stated that her intentions were quite serious, and she came to master the art of handling a sword, and not for any other purposes. She had no intention of sitting on the sidelines. She wanted Mr. Albert to take care of her and come out to practice with her to evaluate her efforts and progress. At the end of a long and intense sparring session, the girl felt extremely tired. She could no longer continue with the same energy as at the beginning of the training. For Albert, this was a minor obstacle, but for Olivia, who was just beginning to master the art of the sword, such efforts were quite difficult and exhausting. After a tense fight, he managed to knock the sword out of her hands, and Olivia was even startled when her weapon fell right in front of her. She froze, unsure how to react. Olivia couldn't understand why her sword had appeared before her eyes, right at her feet. Confused, she bowed low to Albert, acknowledging his skill. She noted that Albert had done a good job and expressed her respect for his professionalism, understanding that his actions were dictated by his skill. Albert noted that she had tried her best, but still, in his opinion, it was clear that the level of the newcomers left much to be desired, and he expected more from the beginners. He was worried that among the newcomers, there might be someone who, like Olivia, hadn't yet mastered the basic skills, including how to hold a sword properly. This left him a little disappointed. Albert asked if there were any girls among the newcomers who already knew how to hold a sword correctly and could demonstrate a higher level of skill during training. At that moment, he noticed Olivia, who had white hair among the newcomers. He pointed his sword at her, indicating that she had caught his attention. Albert inquired about her, asking if she was ready to continue training and improve her skills. He gestured toward her, asking what she planned to do next. He asked if she needed the prince's support. And at that moment, they began to discuss rumors about her, because she was a famous person in certain circles. Everyone around immediately realized that they were talking about Olivia Versace and began to whisper because her last name was widely known in the world, and this added to her fame. This caused all eyes to focus on Olivia. She hadn't expected her training to generate such interest, as she'd planned to go through it quietly and without unnecessary attention. Olivia thought that there would be no problems if she acted independently, ignoring the main characters, and not drawing unnecessary attention to herself. However, she took up the sword with determination and declared that if Albert challenged her, she was ready to accept it, not wanting to retreat or show weakness. Arnold asked the girl's name, but she hesitated, deciding it would be best to hold off. She wanted to keep this moment to herself, not revealing personal information right away. Olivia glanced at him, wondering if she even needed to tell her name to the man she was about to fight. The answer obviously didn't seem important at this point. The girl addressed him and explained that she was part of the Smackhall Academy's swordsmanship department. She believed she should show respect to her superior. Olivia would have been willing to be polite if Arnold had adhered to these standards as well. However, he didn't even bother to demonstrate basic etiquette when interacting with younger children, which clearly upset her. She added that politeness does not matter in combat. As her teacher, the elder, always taught her that what matters most is determination and strength at the moment of confrontation. Taking off her uniform, the girl looked at him and said that she hoped that he would take care of her in the upcoming fight, no matter how it sounded. But she was ready for the fight. Arnold advised Olivia to attack first, to which she replied with a smile that she would decline the offer. However, despite her words, she still decided to take the initiative. She began to attack, and with an easy, confident smile, she continued to fight alongside him, demonstrating her skills. Arnold hadn't expected her to prove herself so quickly in combat. The boy was stunned. He couldn't believe the newcomer could be so strong. It was a real surprise for him, as he hadn't expected such a level of resistance. Olivia demonstrated stunning techniques, her movements were polished, and the entire audience genuinely supported Arnold, hoping for his victory. The atmosphere was tense, everyone was rooting for him, but her skill was impressive. Arnold had no idea the girl was so energetic and capable of such actions. It was a surprise to him, as his opponent didn't look nearly as strong. Arnold's opponent was Kyle's younger sister, which didn't seem out of place as she, like her brother, was trained in martial arts. Her mentor, Mikhail, was Kyle's friend and a professor at the academy. Olivia's style resembled that of her older brother. Their approaches shared something in common, both in their fighting style and their temperaments. Perhaps they both shared similar character traits. Theo, watching this, didn't understand what was going on. She asked what exactly was going on since Arnold seemed a simpler person than Kyle. However, Olivia handled the sword perfectly. It was truly amazing. The girl demonstrated incredible techniques she learned from Daniel. He was her mentor and played a vital role in her development as a fighter. But in battle now, she wasn't just using Daniel's techniques. Once on the field, she was employing skills likely passed down to her by Kyle, her older brother, which added an unexpected effectiveness to her actions. Olivia may have mastered the techniques of two people at once, her brother and Daniel. This gave her a unique advantage and allowed her to be more flexible in combat, employing a variety of styles. Her abilities were impressive. Arnold, although only average, felt her skill was beyond that of a typical beginner. She clearly had the potential to reach a high level. Her fundamental training was sound, and her reaction speed was simply astounding. Every movement was precise and swift, creating the impression of incredible readiness. It might take some time, but her abilities were so impressive that she could easily be called a master. She was clearly ready for new challenges and trials. Olivia felt her strength waning. She began to feel intense hunger, and images began to swim before her eyes, indicating that her body needed rest and nourishment. Arnold, noticing the girl's sudden quiet, wasted no time. He immediately launched an attack, hoping to exploit her moment of weakness. He was confident he could catch her off guard. Olivia was frightened, realizing she was having trouble concentrating due to her hunger. She tried to control herself, but her weakened state prevented her from fully focusing on her defense. It was difficult to comprehend what was happening at that moment. The audience was stunned by how quickly everything was changing, and no one could tell exactly what would happen next. The atmosphere was tense. However, the girl realized she could still regain the initiative despite her hunger. This chance became an opportunity for her. She was able to retreat for a moment and escape his attacks. Despite her physical condition and hunger, Olivia accomplished the impossible. This was her chance, and she didn't let it slip away. Her willpower was decisive. The newcomer emerged victorious, astonishing everyone present. No one expected that, despite all the difficulties she would be able to overcome, Arnold and emerge victorious. Olivia extended her hand to Arnold, smiling gratefully, and noting that he had played an excellent game. She was certain his actions deserved respect and recognition. She introduced herself as Olivia Versace. At that moment, Arnold blushed and smiled sheepishly. This was a surprising turn of events for him, as he had no idea who stood before him. Arnold also noted that Olivia had done an excellent job and introduced himself. He felt her actions were respectable, and this left a strong impression on him. He added that he hoped today's situation wouldn't cause any misunderstandings. The morning training session and his actions were completely normal for the academy, and there was nothing unusual about it. Olivia agreed, noting that this was a tradition of the swordsmanship department. She also emphasized that it was her duty to follow these traditions, and she understood the rules perfectly well. She reminded them that she, too, had an obligation to uphold departmental traditions. It was part of her learning process, and she was proud to be able to uphold these norms. Olivia had apparently accomplished her task, and by all appearances had expressed her thoughts clearly and confidently. If she said it was right, then it was. In any case, the duel had come to an end, and it was time for everyone to leave. Before leaving, Olivia asked Arnold for a favor, saying she had a request. Her words were serious, and she immediately caught his attention, who asked in surprise what exactly she was asking. Olivia said she was terribly hungry and was asking Arnold to take care of her food. Hunger had become a major issue for her, and she asked him to help her satisfy it. Olivia felt a little awkward bothering Arnold with such a request, but unfortunately she had no other choice. Arnold couldn't refuse, and he promised to take care of her needs, as it was his responsibility. Arnold, pondering his course of action, thought of the palace known as the Palace of the Sun. He believed that if his master wished his servant to investigate something related to this place, he could do so without asking unnecessary questions. However, the emperor quickly interrupted his thoughts and declared that enough was enough. It was now important to focus on another matter, and the emperor turned his thoughts elsewhere. The emperor wanted to know how Olivia was doing at the academy, as he had noticed that she might be dissatisfied with something. He sensed that her mood was not quite right, and this required attention. The servant thought perhaps the master was referring to her relationships with someone close to her. However, the emperor hastened to admit that he could simply summon her to resolve the matter directly. The servant, noticing his master's concern, asked him what excuse he intended to use to speak to Olivia. He noticed that her gaze resembled his sister's, which reminded him of her character. The gentleman, with some displeasure, noted that Olivia was not Princess Cecilia, and therefore there was no need to resort to such a method as using anger or aggression in conversation. The emperor remarked that Olivia was very beautiful, and that there was nothing in her appearance that suggested any connection with the counts. He added that only Count Versace might resemble someone, but this was more likely a superficial resemblance. The emperor couldn't understand where this idea came from. He remembered a certain barbarian who seemed almost unlike everyone else, and whose view of the world was a little strange, perhaps due to his age. The emperor continued to reflect on this, noting that Olivia was an excellent daughter-in-law. He reflected on her virtues and the qualities she brought to the family, and this made him value her even more. The servant was extremely surprised by the emperor's thoughts, and without hiding, his surprise asked him again. He was curious about the emperor's assessment of the situation and what he planned to do next. The candidates for the crown prince's wife had already been selected and were currently undergoing training. The emperor knew this, and his decision regarding Olivia became increasingly important. However, the emperor still believed that a situation could always be changed if necessary. He knew there were ways to influence choices, and that some circumstances could be adjusted at the right time. The man stated that His Highness should reconsider his position, as feuding with Versace would be fruitless. Conflict would not strengthen their positions. On the contrary, it could actually be detrimental. The emperor mused that if Olivia consented, it would be interesting to see what would remain of the other family members. All his sons were attractive, and they seemed to have inherited all of their father's best qualities. The emperor told Milo that he wasn't cursing him now, and that this was simply his usual mood. The man didn't take the hint, but he was certain it wasn't an emotion to be taken seriously. The imperial family has always had problems with its ancestors. All the heirs had similar temperaments. But if he were to gather all the princes together, his wife, Empress Cecilia, would likely abandon him. The emperor remarked that there was no need to worry about this. The empress had been rarely appearing at public events lately, so his advice was to leave her alone and not worry. Olivia was finally full, and the weather was so nice it made her smile. The pleasant feeling of a good day helped her relax and forget about work, a little enjoying the moment. Olivia felt well rested, and now she thought returning to Hershey would be a great idea. She thought that, if everything went well, she could return peacefully without encountering the main characters. The main character studies humanities, and the protagonist is involved in politics, so their paths are unlikely to cross. This relieved Olivia of unnecessary worries about a possible meeting with him. Olivia entered a year later than her classmates, and now their ages were no longer the same. This put her in a slightly different position, and she was certain they would no longer share a common destiny. After passing her exams, Olivia decided it would be better to graduate early. She wanted to end this chapter of her life and move on. Suddenly, a stranger approached her and asked if she was Miss Olivia. Olivia didn't immediately recognize the girl, but then she remembered it was the same girl with pink hair. She remembered her from their encounter and greeted the lady with a smile, sensing it was no coincidence. A woman who introduced herself as Jessica Ruana admitted to having seen Olivia's fight. She was impressed by her skills and how well she performed, which inspired her to want to befriend such an amazing person. Jessica thought it might be a little presumptuous of her, but she genuinely wanted to be Olivia's friend. Her flushed face betrayed her emotions, and she hoped she wouldn't be rejected. Perhaps her strong voice and resilience in battle played a role, or perhaps Jessica simply felt a special affinity for Olivia. Either way, she was happy to be able to speak to her. Olivia didn't immediately understand what was causing the girl's reaction, but a laugh burst out of her. Jessica was a little puzzled, unsure how to respond to such an unusual reaction. Olivia offered Jessica friendship, and the girl, barely holding back tears, couldn't believe her happiness. She happily accepted the offer and immediately felt her heart fill with gratitude. Olivia remarked that it seemed like they should go to class as time was running out. Jessica, of course, couldn't help but agree, but her spirits were high after such a significant event in her life. Jessica inquired about Mistress Olivia's motivation for studying swordsmanship. She was genuinely interested in her motives and hoped Olivia would share her decision. Olivia didn't know the exact reason for her choice, but she decided to find out why Jessica wanted to learn swords. Jessica explained that her goal was to become stronger, and she believed this was the only way to achieve that. Olivia emphasized that this is a truly challenging journey, and Jessica must be prepared for the challenges. She acknowledged Jessica's courage in taking on such challenges and expressed admiration for her determination. Olivia believed this could mean Jessica was simply running away from something she couldn't avoid, like an arranged marriage. Perhaps she was trying to avoid having her life determined by others. Olivia noticed that Jessica seemed to be hiding here in this school to avoid forced decisions. Learning swordsmanship was difficult, but Olivia had also chosen a difficult path to escape her own fate. Olivia, feeling a connection with the girl, ran her hand over her head, trying to comfort her. She thought Jessica might understand better, since they were both essentially trying to escape something difficult in their lives. Olivia said that if Jessica started crying, she would leave without her. She didn't want her to dwell on her past and to keep moving forward despite her fears and worries. Olivia urged the girl to follow her and hurry, as there was no time to think. She knew they needed to get to the academic buildings, and that any delay would cost them vital time. The spring weather in Timur was always incredibly fine, and this day was no exception. The weather filled Olivia with a sense of lightness and joy, creating an atmosphere of comfort and peace with her friend. Second-year class of the Sword Arts Department. As Arnold thought it was Mr. Kyle's younger sister. She is incredibly strong, as amazing as Master Kyle's skill. By the way, he had also seen Daniel's skill. I suddenly approached him and asked if he was okay. A second friend also approached and pointed out that anyone could lose, so there was no need to be upset. The guy wondered why she had the same skills as Daniel. The friend said that he knew that he would still have many chances. That's right. No one can know. Maybe he will lose again. It's not such a problem. He saw it all thanks to the pickaxe. This girl acted arrogant because she has power, but her temperament is completely... Then Arnold grabbed him and said that it seemed to him that his eyes were given for decoration. It was unclear how he could say such a thing when he saw that Lady Olivia herself gave him instructions for the duel. The guy got really scared and started saying that he was really wrong. Arnold dismissed it and said that he had a completely different point of view on the matter than they did. His opponent is Lord Kyle's younger sister. This is to be expected from his younger sister and daughter. He knows himself and his enemy. It is obvious that she is even trained in Daniel's skill to find his words in place. First-year class, someone seems to be discussing Olivia. The teacher told everyone to take their places. He was Samuel Lang, the professor of the first-year students responsible for their morning preparation. From now on, they must understand that in this department, it is not enough to simply be good with a sword. Those who fall behind in at least one subject will have to repeat a year. During their military discipline studies, they will study international relations, management, economic leadership. Now they know about it. Military history will give them a chance to learn about what can be gained and lost through war, and will also teach them to be vigilant to the mistakes of soldiers. They will also study mathematics and physics, sometimes even students who do not take such subjects seriously. He sends such students to preparatory courses for knights. Hi. I was thinking there that it really is like a military academy. It will be difficult to graduate just by swinging a sword. Well, The teacher also said that having outstanding swordsmanship skills is not enough. Soldiers who lack the courage to decide and think for themselves can only become tools in the hands of a tyrant. The supreme control of military affairs is not the responsibility of one person. He hopes that his students will become soldiers, for the people, not pawns in the hands of the authorities. Soldiers who can think for themselves and make decisions outside of an egalitarian society are what the children of aristocrats, the most privileged class in the empire, are taught here. A huge amount of confidence must be attached to the names of the professors responsible for their subjects, which schedule. Tomorrow morning, there will be a distribution into groups according to their swordsmanship abilities. High intermediate level, and those who will study the basics. The guy wanted to answer this question. He was asking if there was a place where he could train in the evening. The teacher said that they could use the practice area behind the building, as well as the hall where they had practiced this morning. If they apply, they'll be allocated time to use it for one semester. Olivia asked if anyone could use the space if they applied. The teacher said that priority is given to the 10 students who are in the high-level group, so she must show the best results in tomorrow's competition for placement. If so, then tomorrow during the distribution, she needs to do everything well. If the distribution is based on ability, then she definitely won't end up in the same class as Jessica. Everyone was talking about Miss Versace's admission to the Sword Arts department this semester. They say she won against Arnold easily, but from the very first day she got into trouble. Then a guy approached them and asked if they were students of the Sword Arts department. If so, then they should not call Olivia. Olivia's lessons were over, so she was already thinking about what to do. But suddenly, some guys came up to her and said that there was a guy with silver hair outside looking for her. Olivia was shocked she remembered the silver hair and couldn't believe it.